Veronica Slate had perfected the art of making grown men cry without raising her voice. But when the exhausted single father across her boardroom table dared to meet her eyes, she didn't just threaten his job, she threatened his daughter's survival. "Look at me again, and you're fired," she hissed. Jonah Pierce's hands trembled not from fear, but from fury. His 6-year-old daughter lay fighting cancer while this woman played games with his dignity. What Veronica didn't know, the man she was destroying had already lost everything that mattered. And sometimes people with nothing left become dangerous or invaluable. Want to see how a CEO's cruelty becomes her redemption? Stay until the end. This story will shatter you and rebuild your faith in second chances. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this journey travels. The February wind sliced through downtown Chicago like a verdict, rattling the 42nd floor windows of Halo Works Industries, as if demanding entry to witness what happened inside. Veronica Slate stood at the head of the glass conference table, her reflection multiplied in the windows behind her, a woman who'd learned to weaponize her beauty the same way she weaponized everything else. At 41, she wore power like a second skin, black Armani suit tailored to intimidate, dark hair swept into a knot so severe it looked painful, and heels sharp enough to draw blood if you got too close. She didn't need to raise her voice. She never did. "Mr. Pierce," she said, her tone carrying the temperature of a morgue. "You've been with this company for 3 years. In that time, I've watched you produce work that barely qualifies as mediocre. Today, you've managed to outdo yourself." Jonah Pierce sat 6 seats down, his chair positioned at an angle that suggested he'd tried to make himself small. At 36, he looked older, the kind of aging that happens from the inside out. His suit, once decent, now hung on a frame that had shed weight it couldn't afford to lose. His tie was crooked, his collar slightly frayed, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion that went beyond missing a few hours of sleep. Around the table, 14 other analysts and junior executives sat in various stages of paralysis. They'd learned Veronica's rules within their first week. Don't speak unless addressed, don't make eye contact, and never, ever show weakness. The boardroom had its own ecosystem, and Veronica Slate was the apex predator. "The Meridian portfolio," Veronica continued, sliding a tablet across the polished surface toward Jonah. It stopped precisely in front of him, an accusation delivered with geometric precision. "You projected a 4.7% quarterly gain. The actual return was 3.2%. Would you care to explain how you managed to be so catastrophically wrong?" Jonah's hands rested on the table, fingers interlaced to hide the tremor. He'd stopped at the hospital that morning before work. Maisie had thrown up twice during the night, and the nurses needed to adjust her medications. He'd sat with her until she fell back asleep, her small, bald head warm against his chest, her body so light it terrified him. Then he'd driven straight to the office because missing a meeting with Veronica Slate was career suicide, and his career was the only thing keeping his daughter alive. "Market conditions," he said quietly. "The tech sector experienced unexpected market conditions." Veronica repeated the words as if tasting something rotten. "Market conditions. How refreshingly original." She moved around the table like a shark circling wounded prey, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that made everyone's shoulders tense. "Tell me, Mr. Pierce, did market conditions also prevent you from attending the Baxter presentation last Thursday? Or were you simply too busy to do your job?" Jonah felt 14 pairs of eyes on him. They weren't sympathetic. Sympathy was a luxury no one at Halo Works could afford. They were relieved it was him instead of them, grateful that Veronica's attention had found a target and might pass them by. "My daughter," he began. "I don't care." Veronica's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more lethal. "I don't care about your daughter, your life, or whatever excuses you've rehearsed. What I care about is that this company's reputation is built on precision, and you are the opposite of precise." She stopped directly behind him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and cold. "Look at me, Mr. Pierce." Jonah knew the trap. Everyone at the table knew it. Veronica Slate's most famous rule: eye contact was permission to destroy you. If you looked away, you were weak. If you met her gaze, you were challenging her. Either way, you lost. But something in Jonah's chest, Some muscle of resistance he didn't know he still possessed made him turn his head and lift his eyes to hers. For 3 seconds, the boardroom forgot how to breathe. Veronica's face didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, like a blade sliding from its sheath. "You have courage," she said softly. "How unfortunate. Courage without competence is just arrogance. Look at me again, and you're fired." The words landed like a sentence. Jonah turned back to the table, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. "You're dismissed," Veronica said to the room. "Except Pierce, you stay." The exodus was silent and swift. Analysts grabbed tablets and laptops with the efficiency of soldiers evacuating a hot zone. Within 20 seconds, the boardroom held only two people, a woman who'd built an empire by forgetting how to feel, and a man who felt too much and was drowning in it. Veronica walked to the windows, her back to him. Chicago spread below in gray and white, the frozen lake, the canyon of buildings, the toy cars navigating streets that looked like scars from this height. 3 years ago, she said, you came to me with impressive credentials. Wharton MBA, 6 years at Goldsmith Kline, a reputation for being thorough and reliable. Do you remember what I told you during your interview? Jonah's voice came out rougher than he intended. You said mediocrity was a virus and you wouldn't let it infect your company. Exactly. She turned, her silhouette sharp against the winter light. So explain to me why I'm watching you become the very thing I despise. The question hung in the air between them, and for a moment Jonah considered telling her the truth. About Hannah, his wife, dead 14 months from a brain aneurysm that struck while she was folding laundry. About Maisie, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 7 months later, as if the universe wanted to make sure he understood how thoroughly it could dismantle a life. About the bills, the endless crushing bills that insurance covered only partially, that arrived in his mailbox like small white grenades. About the exhaustion that lived in his bones now, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't touch. But Veronica Slate didn't want reasons. She wanted results, and he had nothing left to give her but the truth he'd been avoiding. I can't do this anymore, he said. The admission surprised them both. Veronica's eyebrows lifted fractionally. Excuse me? I can't do this, Jonah repeated, and saying it out loud felt like opening a release valve on pressure he'd been holding for months. I'm resigning, effective immediately. For 5 seconds, Veronica just stared at him. People didn't resign from HaloWorks. They were fired or they endured. The idea that someone would choose to leave her company was apparently outside her operational framework. You're resigning, she said flatly. Yes. Because I criticized your work. Because... Jonah stood, his chair scraping against marble. Because I'm drowning, Miss Slate, and I'd rather drown honestly than spend what little energy I have left pretending I'm not. He expected anger. Instead, Veronica's expression shifted into something that might have been curiosity if she were capable of it. Sit down, she said. I'm leaving. Sit down. The command had weight this time. If you're going to quit, you're going to do it properly, formally, in my office, with documentation. Jonah wanted to argue, but the truth was he'd never resigned from a job before and didn't actually know the procedure. He sat. Veronica checked her watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than his daughter's last hospital stay. We'll handle this at 6 o'clock. Until then, you're still employed. Use your remaining hours to transfer your files to Morrison. He'll absorb your accounts. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. And Pierce? Whatever personal crisis you're experiencing, I genuinely don't care. But I do care about loose ends. Make sure yours are tied. Then she was gone, leaving Jonah alone in a boardroom full of empty chairs and winter light that made everything look like it was dying. The afternoon passed in a fog of mechanical tasks. Jonah transferred files, wrote notes for Morrison, a 28-year-old climber who'd probably celebrate getting Jonah's accounts, and tried not to think about what came next. The HaloWorks salary had been the anchor keeping his and Maisie's life from floating into complete chaos. Without it, they had maybe 2 months before the money ran out. His phone buzzed at 4:17 p.m. A text from his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who picked Maisie up from school on days Jonah couldn't manage it, which was most days now. Maisie seems tired. Gave her soup. She's watching cartoons. Don't rush. Jonah typed back a thank you he'd typed 100 times before, each one feeling more insufficient than the last. Mrs. Chen, 76 and widowed herself, had become his unexpected lifeline. She asked for nothing, accepted his stammered gratitude with a wave, and treated Maisie like the granddaughter she'd never had. The world, Jonah had learned, contained more casual saints than he'd ever imagined. At 5:45 p.m., he packed his personal belongings into a cardboard box someone had left by the copy machine. 3 years at Halo Works fit into 12 cubic inches. A coffee mug Maisie had painted, a photo of Hannah holding newborn Maisie in the hospital, a snow globe of Chicago that Hannah had bought him as a joke because he'd complained about the winters, and a letter. He'd written it last night after Maisie finally fell asleep, her small hand wrapped around his thumb the way she did when the pain was bad. The letter was addressed to Hannah, a habit he'd developed after she died, writing to her the way some people prayed, telling her things he couldn't say out loud because saying them would make them too real. I'm so scared, Hannah. I'm scared the money will run out. I'm scared I'll have to choose between rent and treatment. I'm scared Maisie will see me break and think it's her fault. I'm scared I'm failing her the way I failed you by not seeing the signs, by letting you carry laundry upstairs when your head hurt, by being at work when you collapsed alone in our bedroom. I'm scared that I'm not strong enough to be her father and her mother both. I'm scared that love isn't enough and never was. He'd folded the letter and tucked it in his pocket because keeping it close made Hannah feel less distant. Now, staring at the box of his life, he made a decision. He took the letter out and placed it in the bottom of the box, under the photo. If Veronica wanted to know why he was drowning, let her find out after he was gone. At 5:58 p.m., he carried the box toward Veronica's office on the 43rd floor. The executive level was a different country. Thick carpet, art that cost more than cars, silence so complete it felt like pressure. Veronica's door was open. She sat behind a desk made of glass and steel, working on her computer with the focus of someone who'd forgotten that other humans required sleep. She didn't look up when he entered. "Close the door," she said. "Sit." Jonah set the box on the floor beside the chair and sat. The office smelled like leather and the faint ghost of perfume. Behind Veronica, the windows showed Chicago beginning its transition to night, lights emerging like stars in reverse. "Resignation letter," Veronica said, extending her hand without looking away from her screen. "I didn't write one." Now she looked at him. "You're resigning without a letter?" "I'm resigning without ceremony," Jonah said. "I'll send you an email tonight. Or Morrison can draft something. I don't care." Veronica leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression that might have been annoyance or might have been something else. "You're angry." "I'm tired." "Of me. Of this." Jonah gestured vaguely at the office, the building, the entire architecture of the life he'd been trying to maintain. "Of pretending that work matters when my daughter—" His phone exploded. Not literally, but the sound was violent enough to make them both flinch. Buzzing, ringing, the cascade of notifications that meant something was catastrophically wrong. Jonah grabbed it from his pocket, his hand suddenly clumsy, and saw Mrs. Chen's name lighting up the screen alongside 3 missed calls from a number he recognized too well, Chicago Memorial Hospital. He answered. "Mrs. Chen." "Jonah." Her voice was steady but urgent, the tone of someone delivering bad news they've rehearsed. "Maisie's fever. It spiked to 103. She's confused. I called the hospital and they said, 'Bring her now.' I'm sorry. I should have noticed sooner." "I'm coming." Jonah was already standing, the phone clamped to his ear, the box forgotten on the floor. "I'm 15 minutes away. Keep her cool." Wet cloth on her forehead. "I'm coming." He ended the call and turned to leave, then stopped. Veronica was standing too, her face locked in that neutral mask she wore like armor. "I'm sorry," he said automatically, though he wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. "Go," Veronica said. Jonah went. He was halfway to the elevator when he realized he'd left the box. He didn't go back. There was no time, and besides, what did any of it matter? A coffee mug? A snow globe? A letter to a dead woman? Maisie was the only thing that mattered, and Maisie needed him now. The elevator took forever. The parking garage took forever. His car, a 10-year-old Honda with a check engine light that had been on for 3 months, took forever to start. Chicago traffic was a nightmare of red lights and slow-moving stupidity, and Jonah drove with his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. Fever. Maisie's fevers weren't normal fevers. They were the body's alarm system screaming that something had bypassed the chemotherapy's defenses. Infection, sepsis. Words that doctors used in calm voices while parents heard only, "Your daughter might die tonight." He was 10 minutes from Mrs. Chen's apartment when he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it. A black Mercedes SUV, driving with the aggressive precision of someone who knew exactly where they were going and didn't care what was in the way. Driving like Veronica Slate. Jonah's brain couldn't process it. Why would she? But there was no time to wonder. He pulled up to Mrs. Chen's building, double-parked with his hazards on, and ran. Mrs. Chen met him at her door with Maisie wrapped in a blanket, the girl's face flushed and her eyes glassy. "She threw up once," Mrs. Chen said, handing Maisie over like something fragile and holy. "I'm so sorry." "You saved her," Jonah said, and then he was running again, Maisie's small body burning against his chest, her arms loose around his neck in a way that terrified him. "Daddy," she mumbled, "my head hurts." "I know, baby. We're going to fix it." He buckled her into the back seat, hands shaking so badly he needed 3 tries to get the clasp right. He was about to climb into the driver's seat when the Mercedes pulled up behind him, blocking him in. Veronica got out. She was still in her suit, still in her heels, and she crossed the distance between them like someone walking into a boardroom. Except her face wasn't neutral anymore. It was tight and pale, and her eyes moved to the back seat where Maisie lay bundled and small. "Get in," Veronica said. It wasn't a request. "What are you—" "Get in my car. I'll drive." She was already moving toward the Mercedes, already opening the back door. "Bring her." Jonah's mind had stopped working in any logical way, but his body understood. Veronica's car was faster, newer, and she drove like someone who didn't believe traffic laws applied to her. He grabbed Maisie from his back seat, carried her to the Mercedes, and climbed in beside her. Veronica was behind the wheel before he'd closed his door. She pulled into traffic with the confidence of someone who assumed the world would move for her. And it did. Cars shifted, lanes opened, the Mercedes surged forward, and Veronica drove with a focus that was almost violent, her jaw set, her hands precise on the wheel. "Chicago Memorial?" she asked. "Yes." She didn't ask anything else. She drove. Maisie stirred against Jonah's chest. "Who's that?" she whispered, looking at Veronica's reflection in the rearview mirror. "She's—" Jonah's voice cracked. "She's helping us, baby." "She's pretty," Maisie said, and then her eyes drifted closed again. Veronica's eyes flicked to the mirror, then back to the road. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. They made it to Chicago Memorial in 8 minutes, a drive that should have taken 20. Veronica pulled up to the emergency entrance and was out of the car before Jonah had even unbuckled Maisie. She opened his door, and for a moment they were face to face, separated only by the space where Maisie lay burning with fever. "I'll park," Veronica said. "Go." Jonah went. The ER nurses knew Maisie. Too many visits meant familiar faces, and familiar faces meant things were bad. They took her from his arms with practiced gentleness, asked the right questions, got her on a gurney and through doors that Jonah couldn't follow beyond. He stood in the hallway, his arms empty, his heart a clenched fist, and tried to breathe. "Mr. Pierce!" He turned. Dr. Okafor, Maisie's oncologist, was walking toward him in scrubs, her face kind but serious. She'd been with them since the diagnosis. A woman whose competence Jonah trusted absolutely, and whose compassion made him want to weep. "Fever, confusion," Jonah said before she could ask. "It spiked fast." "We're running labs now," Dr. Okafor said. "Likely an infection. We'll get cultures and start her on broad-spectrum antibiotics. You did the right thing bringing her straight in." "How bad?" Dr. Okafor touched his arm. "Let me look at her first. Then we'll talk. Why don't you sit down? You look like you're about to fall over." She disappeared through the doors, leaving Jonah alone in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and fear. He found a chair, blue plastic, mounted to the wall, designed to be uncomfortable enough that you couldn't forget where you were, and sat. That's where Veronica found him. She walked down the hallway with the same purposeful stride she used in the office, except now she looked off. Her hair had come loose from its knot. Her suit jacket was wrinkled. She stopped 3 feet from him, as if uncertain whether she had permission to come closer. "They took her back," Jonah said. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "They think it's an infection." Veronica didn't respond. She stood there perfectly still, and Jonah saw something he'd never seen before. Uncertainty. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know." "You didn't have to drive us." "I know." "So why did you?" Veronica looked away, and in profile her face showed something unguarded. "I saw your box," she said quietly. "After you left, I saw the photo and the letter." Jonah's chest went cold. "You read my letter?" "I read enough." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were different, darker, haunted. "I had a daughter once." The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water. "Her name was Claire," Veronica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was 4. Bacterial meningitis. 17 years ago." She swallowed. "I was at work when she got sick. I was always at work. My husband called me 6 times before I answered. By the time I got to the hospital, she was—" She stopped, shook her head. "I don't talk about this. I haven't talked about it in 15 years. But when I saw your letter, when I realized what you were carrying," her voice fractured. "I couldn't let you do this alone." Jonah felt something in his chest crack open. This woman, this impossible, terrifying woman who ruled her company like a tyrant, had lost a daughter, had lived for 17 years with the kind of grief he was only beginning to understand, had maybe built her entire empire as armor against that loss. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't." Veronica's voice sharpened. "Don't be sorry. Just—" She looked toward the doors where Maisie had disappeared. "Just let me stay, please." So Jonah did. They sat in the hallway together, not speaking, as the hospital moved around them in its endless rhythm of crisis and healing. Jonah tried to pray, but didn't know how anymore, so instead he just sat and breathed and tried not to imagine a world without his daughter in it. At some point, Veronica went to the vending machine and came back with 2 bottles of water and a package of crackers. She handed him 1 bottle without comment. He drank it without tasting. They sat. An hour passed, then another. When Dr. Okafor finally emerged, both Jonah and Veronica stood. The doctor's eyes moved between them with visible curiosity, but she was too professional to ask. "She's stable," Dr. Okafor said, and Jonah felt his knees nearly buckle. "It's an ear infection that spread. We caught it early. She's on IV antibiotics and fluids. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but she's going to be fine." "Can I see her?" Jonah asked. "She's asking for you." Dr. Okafor smiled. "And she wants to know who the pretty lady is." Veronica made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else. They followed Dr. Okafor through the doors into the pediatric ward, where Maisie lay in a bed that made her look even smaller than she was. Her eyes were open now, clearer, and when she saw Jonah, she smiled, that smile that destroyed him and rebuilt him simultaneously. "Daddy," she said, "I was scared." "I know, baby." He sat on the edge of her bed, careful of the IV line in her small hand. "But you're okay now. You're so brave." Maisie's gaze drifted past him to where Veronica stood in the doorway, hovering like someone who wasn't sure she belonged. "You came too," Maisie said. Veronica stepped into the room, moving with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I did." "Are you my dad's friend?" The question hung in the air. Jonah turned to look at Veronica, curious what she'd say. Veronica met Maisie's eyes. No rule about eye contact with children, apparently, and something in her face softened in a way Jonah wouldn't have believed possible 6 hours ago. "I'd like to be," she said quietly, "if that's okay with you." Maisie considered this with the seriousness of someone making an important decision. Okay, she said finally, but you have to visit, because Dad gets sad when I fall asleep, and maybe you could keep him company. Jonah felt his throat close. Veronica's eyes moved to him, and in them he saw recognition. She understood exactly what Maisie was saying, exactly what it meant to watch someone you love slip into unconsciousness and wonder if they'll wake up. I can do that, Veronica said. And she did. She stayed through that night, sitting in the corner of Maisie's room in a chair that couldn't have been comfortable, still in her suit, her heels kicked off at some point and left under the chair. Jonah dozed fitfully in another chair, waking every time a nurse came in to check Maisie's vitals. And each time he woke, Veronica was there, watching the monitors, watching Maisie breathe, her face unguarded in the dim light. At 3:00 a.m., Maisie woke long enough to ask for water. Veronica got it before Jonah could stand. She held the cup while Maisie drank, adjusted the girl's blanket, and smoothed hair that wasn't there anymore. You smell nice, Maisie mumbled. Thank you, Veronica whispered. Are you magic? Veronica smiled, an expression so rare Jonah almost didn't recognize it. No, sweetheart, I'm just someone who forgot how to be human for a while. Maisie's eyes drifted closed. That's sad. It is, Veronica agreed. She stayed there, one hand resting on the bed rail, until Maisie's breathing deepened into real sleep. When she finally returned to her chair, she found Jonah watching her. She likes you, he said softly. She doesn't know me. Maybe that's why. Jonah shifted in his chair, his body aching from a combination of stress and bad furniture. You don't have to stay. I know you have. Work? Veronica's laugh was bitter. Work is all I've had for 17 years. It's a cold bed to sleep in, Pierce. Trust me. Then why? Because I spent Claire's last night at the office, Veronica said, and her voice was stripped of everything except truth. I missed it. I missed everything. Her last words, her last breath, her last... She stopped, visibly struggling. So yes, I'm staying, because maybe if I stay here with you and Maisie, it'll hurt less. Or maybe it'll hurt more. I don't know. But I'm staying. Jonah nodded. They sat in silence as the hospital night ticked forward in quiet increments. Machines beeping, footsteps in distant hallways, the muted voice of a television somewhere. Someone else's vigil bleeding through the walls. At 6:00 a.m., dawn began pressing against the windows. Maisie slept peacefully, her fever broken, her small chest rising and falling with reassuring rhythm. Veronica had fallen asleep at some point, her head tilted against the wall, her face younger in the morning light. Jonah watched her and thought about armor, about how people built walls to survive their grief, about how sometimes those walls became prisons, about how sometimes, if you were very lucky, someone opened a door you'd forgotten existed. When Veronica woke, she didn't remember where she was. The fluorescent lighting, the antiseptic smell, the mechanical beeping. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was somewhere 17 years in the past, in a different hospital room where a different child had stopped breathing. Then her eyes focused on the present. Maisie sleeping peacefully, Jonah standing at the window with a cup of terrible coffee. Morning light turning Chicago's skyline golden. She'd spent the night in a hospital, in a chair, still wearing yesterday's suit. Veronica Slate didn't do things like this. She had a penthouse in Gold Coast with a bed that cost $12,000. She had a routine, gym at 5 a.m., green smoothie, news briefing before most people had opened their eyes. Her life was controlled, measured, optimized for maximum efficiency and minimum feeling. Yet here she was, her neck stiff, her makeup probably ruined, watching a man she'd tried to destroy yesterday hold vigil over his daughter. You're awake, Jonah said without turning from the window. His voice was rough from exhaustion. Coffee's in the hallway. It's terrible, but it's hot. How is she? Veronica stood, her body protesting. Her heels were still under the chair. She left them there. Stable. Fever's down to 99.2. Dr. Okafor came by an hour ago. Said if everything stays steady, we can go home this afternoon. He finally turned to look at her, and something in his expression was different, softer, but also more direct. You stayed. I said I would. Most people say a lot of things. Veronica walked to the window, putting several feet of distance between them because proximity felt dangerous right now. Below, Chicago was waking up. The morning rush building. People flooding into buildings where they'd spend their days pushing paper and attending meetings and pretending their jobs mattered. She'd been one of those people for so long she'd forgotten there was any other way to live. I built Halo Works from nothing, she said quietly. 12 years ago, I had an idea, a laptop, and a studio apartment in Pilsen. No investors, no connections, just work. 80-hour weeks, 90-hour weeks. I told myself it was necessary, that success required sacrifice. She paused. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't sacrificing my time. I was sacrificing myself and everyone around me. Jonah came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. Claire, he said, after she died, my husband left. He blamed me. He was right to. Veronica's reflection in the window looked like a stranger, disheveled, tired, human. I threw myself into work because work doesn't die. Work doesn't leave. Work doesn't look at you with a 4-year-old's eyes and ask why mommy didn't come home when she was sick. That's not... Don't. Veronica turned to face him. Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. I've had 17 years of therapists tell me that, and they're wrong. I chose work over her every single day, and when it mattered most, she paid the price. Her voice dropped. So yes, I stayed last night, because watching you with Maisie, it's the first time in 17 years I've seen what I threw away, and maybe I can't fix what I destroyed, but I can make sure you don't make my mistakes. Behind them, Maisie stirred. They both turned, and the girl's eyes opened slowly, landing on them with the clarity of someone fully awake. You're still here, Maisie said to Veronica. There was wonder in her voice, like she'd half expected the pretty lady to have been a fever dream. Veronica moved to the bedside, and Jonah watched something remarkable happen. The Ice Queen of Halo Works, the CEO who'd made grown men cry in boardrooms, knelt beside a 6-year-old's hospital bed with the careful reverence of someone approaching something holy. I'm still here, Veronica said. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Hungry. Maisie's hand reached out, small and pale against the white sheets, and touched Veronica's face. You have pretty eyes, but they're sad. Jonah saw Veronica's throat work. Sometimes people have sad eyes, she said carefully. My dad has sad eyes too, Maisie announced with the brutal honesty of children. Ever since Mommy went to heaven. Do you have someone in heaven? The question hung in the air like something fragile. Jonah started to intervene. Mais, that's not polite. But Veronica raised a hand to stop him. I do, Veronica told Maisie. A little girl. Her name was Claire. Was she sick like me? She was. But she got sick very fast. Too fast for the doctors to help? Maisie processed this with the gravity of someone who understood mortality better than most adults. That's really sad. I bet she misses you. Veronica's eyes filled. She didn't try to hide it. I hope so. You should draw her, Maisie said. I draw pictures for my mom. Dad keeps them in a special box. It helps the missing not hurt so much. She paused, considering. Well, it still hurts, but different. Like, she searched for words, like a hug that squeezes too tight, but you don't want it to stop. Jonah felt his own eyes burn. His 6-year-old daughter, bald from chemotherapy and wise beyond her years, had just articulated grief better than any therapist he'd ever seen. Veronica stood abruptly, swiping at her eyes. I should go. Let you rest. Let your father. Will you come back? Maisie asked. The question stopped Veronica at the door. She turned and Jonah saw the war happening behind her eyes. The instinct to run versus something else, something newer and terrifying. Do you want me to? Veronica asked. Yes. You make Dad less lonely. Maisie said it like stating a simple fact which made it more devastating. And you smell nice. And maybe you could meet my turtle. His name is Professor Shellsworth, and he's very distinguished. Despite everything, Veronica laughed, a real laugh, startled and genuine. Professor Shellsworth. I named him, Maisie said proudly. Dad says I have sophisticated taste. Your dad is right. Veronica looked at Jonah, and something passed between them that wasn't quite friendship yet, but wasn't employer-employee anymore either. I'll come back, if that's okay with your father. It's more than okay, Jonah said quietly. Veronica nodded. Then she collected her shoes from under the chair, slipped them on with the efficiency of someone reassembling armor, and left. But not before looking back once at Maisie, her expression unguarded and raw. After she'd gone, Maisie turned to Jonah with a satisfied smile. She's going to be your girlfriend, Dad. She is, I can tell. She looks at you the way you used to look at Mom when you thought I wasn't watching. Maisie yawned, her eyelids already heavy again. It's okay, you know. Mom would want you to be happy. Jonah sat on the edge of her bed, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. Baby, we're not. But Maisie was already asleep, her hand curled around his, her breathing deep and steady and alive. Dr. Okafor released them at 2 p.m. with instructions, prescriptions, and a follow-up appointment for next week. Jonah carried Maisie to his car. She was awake but groggy, insisting she could walk but accepting his arms when he offered. Mrs. Chen had gone to their apartment to make soup, bless her, and Jonah drove through Chicago traffic with the careful attention of someone transporting the world's most precious cargo. Maisie dozed against the window. Jonah's phone buzzed at a red light. A text from an unknown number. This is Veronica Slate. Morrison gave me your personal number. I hope that's acceptable. I wanted to check on Maisie and to discuss your employment status. Jonah stared at the message. Employment status. Right. He'd been resigning when this all started. He'd left his box in her office, including that letter he'd never meant for anyone else to read. He typed back one-handed. She's good. Coming home now. Job. We should probably talk. The response came immediately. Friday, 6 p.m. My office. We'll talk then. Rest until. Not a question, not really an invitation, but not a termination either. The week that followed was strange and fragile, like living inside a bubble that might pop at any moment. Maisie recovered quickly. Children had that magic ability to bounce back from things that would flatten adults. And by Wednesday, she was back to drawing elaborate pictures of Professor Shellsworth's adventures and demanding mac and cheese for every meal. Jonah took the week off, using the last of his PTO to stay home with her. He'd expected Halo Works to push back, to demand he return or at least stay available. Instead, Morrison sent a terse email saying his accounts were covered and he should focus on his daughter. No threats, no passive aggression. It was unsettling. More unsettling, the flowers that arrived Thursday afternoon. Expensive, clearly from a high-end florist. Tulips and daisies in a crystal vase with a card that read simply, "For Maisie, get well soon." V.S. Maisie was thrilled. Jonah was confused. Veronica Slate sending flowers felt like witnessing a lion doing needlepoint. "The pretty lady sent flowers," Maisie announced, arranging them on the kitchen counter with the seriousness of a museum curator. "See, Dad? She likes us." "She's being polite," Jonah said, but even he didn't believe it. Thursday evening, another text. "How is she?" Jonah responded while making dinner, his phone propped against the sugar bowl. "Eating everything in sight. Driving me crazy." "So, back to normal. Good. And you?" The question surprised him. "Managing, tired, grateful." "Don't be grateful. You'd do the same for anyone." Would he? Jonah wasn't sure. He'd been so focused on survival for so long that hypothetical altruism felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. But maybe Veronica was right. Maybe he would have. Friday arrived with the inevitability of a deadline. Jonah arranged for Mrs. Chen to stay with Maisie, dressed in his best remaining suit, the one that still fit properly, and drove to Halo Works with the feeling of a man walking toward either execution or pardon, unsure which. The office was different at 6 p.m. The frantic energy of the workday had subsided into something quieter. Analysts hunched over terminals, finishing projects. Cleaning staff moved through empty conference rooms. Jonah took the elevator to the 43rd floor, his reflection in the polished doors showing a man who looked older than 36, but steadier than he'd been a week ago. Veronica's door was open. She was at her desk, working on her laptop, and when he knocked, she looked up with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Pierce, come in. Close the door." He did. The office looked the same: glass desk, leather chairs, Chicago sprawling beyond the windows. But it felt different. Maybe he was different. "Sit," Veronica said, closing her laptop. She was in another severe suit, her hair back in that punishing knot, but her face was less guarded than it had been in the hospital. "We need to discuss several things. First, your resignation. I understand if you want to accept it," Jonah said. "My performance has been adequate considering the circumstances." Which brings me to the second thing. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer and slid it across to him. "Your daughter's medical situation represents a significant financial burden. I did some research. The treatment protocol she's on, the medications, the ongoing care. Even with insurance, you're looking at substantial out-of-pocket costs." Jonah felt his defenses rising. "That's not your concern." "It became my concern when I read your letter," Veronica said flatly. "And before you get angry about the invasion of privacy, understand that I'm trying to help you, which is new for me, so bear with me while I figure out how to do it without being offensive." Despite everything, Jonah almost smiled. "You're doing great so far." "Pierce, I'm trying to offer you money." The words landed like a slap. Jonah stood, his chair scraping. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, it's—" Veronica stood too, coming around the desk. "Sit down, please." The please was unexpected enough that Jonah sat. Veronica remained standing, pacing to the window and back like someone working out a difficult equation. HaloWorks has a foundation: corporate philanthropy, disaster relief, scholarships, tax-deductible causes that make us look good in the media. One of our programs provides financial assistance to employees facing medical hardship. It's underutilized because no one knows about it, and the application process is deliberately obtuse. I'm streamlining it, starting with you. That sounds like charity with extra steps. It's corporate policy. It's structured. It's available to any employee who qualifies. She stopped pacing, facing him directly. "But yes, you'd be the first recipient. And yes, I'm making it easier for you to qualify because I can. Because I'm the CEO and I make the rules." Jonah stared at her. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you can't help Maisie if you're drowning in debt. Because your work suffers when you're terrified of losing your job. Because—" She stopped, something vulnerable crossing her face. "Because I couldn't help Claire, but maybe I can help your daughter. And maybe that makes me selfish. Maybe I'm doing this for me more than for you. But does it matter if the end result is that Maisie gets the treatment she needs?" The office was very quiet. Outside, Chicago glittered in the growing dark, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in its towers. "How much are we talking about?" Jonah asked carefully. Veronica returned to her desk, opened the folder, and showed him a number. Jonah's vision actually blurred. It was enough to cover 6 months of treatment. Maybe more. I can't accept this." "You can. You will." Veronica's voice was firm. "Here's the arrangement. You stay at HaloWorks. You continue doing your job. When Maisie needs medical care, you take the time you need. I'll assign you a more manageable portfolio. Nothing that requires late nights or weekend travel. You'll work with Morrison to distribute your current accounts, and we'll bring in a junior analyst to support you." "You're creating a position for me," Jonah said slowly, "one that doesn't really exist. I'm restructuring to retain valuable talent. That's not charity. That's smart business." She paused. "And before you argue, yes, you are valuable. Your analysis is thorough when you're not operating on 3 hours of sleep. Your client retention rate was exemplary before your life fell apart. You're good at this job, Pierce. You're just terrible at doing it while simultaneously trying to be a single parent to a child fighting cancer." Jonah felt something in his chest loosen. Not quite relief, not quite gratitude, but something adjacent to both. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll stay. Say you'll let someone help you for once instead of trying to carry everything alone." Veronica's voice softened. "Say you'll let me try to be a better person than I've been for the last 17 years. Their eyes met, and Jonah saw in her face the same thing he felt in his chest, the fragile hope that maybe, against all probability, broken things could start to heal if they found the right people to heal alongside. "Yes," he said. "Okay, yes." Veronica nodded, something like relief washing over her features. "Good. HR will have the paperwork ready Monday. The foundation funds will be available immediately." She sat back down, adopting her CEO posture like someone putting on a coat. "Now, third thing. Maisie invited me to meet Professor Shellsworth." Jonah blinked at the conversational shift. "She did? I don't know anything about turtles or children or how to interact with either without being terrifying." Veronica's expression was somewhere between determined and panicked. "But I said I'd come back and I don't break my word." "You want to come visit?" "If that's acceptable." Jonah thought about his tiny apartment with its mismatched furniture and the dinosaur drawings covering the refrigerator and the pile of medical bills on the kitchen counter. He thought about Veronica Slate, who probably lived in a penthouse with marble counters and abstract art, walking into his messy, broken, duct-taped-together life. "Tomorrow," he said. "Lunch. Maisie would love it. But I have to warn you, she'll ask you approximately 8,000 questions and show you every single thing she's ever drawn. I can handle that. And she'll probably try to give you a makeover. I can handle that too. And she might ask if you're my girlfriend." Veronica's eyebrows rose. "And what would you tell her?" Jonah stood, suddenly aware that they were treading into territory neither of them had mapped. "I'd tell her you're someone who's becoming very important to us. And we're lucky to know you." Something in Veronica's expression shifted, softened and sharpened simultaneously, like ice beginning to thaw. "I'm the lucky one, Pierce. You just don't know it yet." She walked him to the door. They stood in the threshold, Chicago humming 43 floors below, the office lights casting shadows that made them both look vulnerable. "Thank you," Jonah said. "For everything, for staying that night, for this." He gestured at the office, the folder, the impossible generosity she was trying to disguise as corporate policy. "Don't thank me yet," Veronica said. "I'm still figuring out how to be a human being again. I'll probably be terrible at it." "You came to the hospital. You stayed all night. You're helping Maisie." Jonah smiled. "I think you're doing better than you think." After he left, Veronica stood in her office doorway for a long time, watching the elevator lights descend. Then she returned to her desk, pulled out a piece of paper, and did something she hadn't done in 17 years. She started writing a letter to Claire. "Dear Claire, I met a little girl this week. Her name is Maisie, and she's 6 years old and sick and braver than I've ever been. She asked me if you were in heaven. I said yes, even though I don't know if I believe in heaven anymore. But if it exists, I hope you're there. I hope you're somewhere that doesn't hurt. I think I've been punishing myself for 17 years, punishing everyone around me too, building walls because if I never let anyone close, I could never fail them the way I failed you. But Maisie's father, Jonah, he's failing too, or he thinks he is. And watching him fight for his daughter the way I didn't fight for you, it's breaking something open inside me, something I thought I'd killed. I don't know if I deserve another chance. I don't know if redemption is real, or if it's just something we tell ourselves to make the guilt bearable. But I'm going to try. For Maisie, for Jonah, for you. I love you. I never stopped. And I'm sorry. I'll be sorry every day for the rest of my life. Mom." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer alongside the only photo she kept of Claire, a little girl with dark curls and Veronica's eyes, laughing at something off camera, frozen forever at 4 years old. Then Veronica Slate, CEO of Halo Works Industries, woman of steel and ice and control, put her head in her hands and wept. Saturday arrived bright and unseasonably warm, the kind of Chicago day that made people forget winter existed. Jonah spent the morning cleaning the apartment with Maisie's enthusiastic but unhelpful assistance. She mostly rearranged her stuffed animals and lectured Professor Shellsworth about proper hosting etiquette. "Dad, does Miss Veronica like mac and cheese?" Maisie called from the living room, where she was arranging cushions into what she called a fancy sitting area. "I don't know, baby. We'll ask her. Everyone likes mac and cheese. It's scientifically proven." Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway, hands on hips. "You need to change your shirt. That one has a stain." Jonah looked down at his perfectly clean shirt. This one's fine. Dad, Maisie's tone suggested he was being deliberately difficult. You have to look nice. She's a guest, and also possibly your future wife. Maisie! Mrs. Chen says when a beautiful lady visits, it means romance. Maisie said this with the authority of someone citing an ancient text. And Miss Veronica is very beautiful, and you need romance. Mrs. Chen says you're wasting your youth pining. Jonah made a mental note to have a conversation with Mrs. Chen about what she discussed with his 6-year-old. I'm not pining. You look at Mom's picture every night before bed and tell her about your day. That's pining, Dad. Out of the mouths of babes. Jonah pulled his daughter into a hug. I love you, you little troublemaker. I love you too. Now go change your shirt. He changed his shirt. Veronica arrived at noon exactly, which didn't surprise Jonah. The woman probably scheduled bathroom breaks. What did surprise him was her outfit. Jeans, a soft gray sweater, minimal makeup, her hair down in waves that made her look younger and somehow more uncertain. She held a gift bag, which she offered to Jonah at the door with the awkwardness of someone who'd overthought a simple gesture. For Maisie, she said. I didn't know what 6-year-olds like, so I guessed. Before Jonah could respond, Maisie appeared, rocketing past him to stare up at Veronica with starry eyes. You came, and you look like a princess. Are those real jeans? They're so clean. Veronica laughed. That startled, genuine laugh Jonah was learning to recognize. They're real, and you must be Maisie. You look much better than the last time I saw you. I'm not sick anymore. Well, I'm still sick, but not infection sick, just regular cancer sick. Maisie said this as casually as discussing the weather. Do you want to meet Professor Shellsworth? He's been practicing looking distinguished all morning. I would be honored. Maisie grabbed Veronica's hand and dragged her into the apartment. Jonah followed, watching the Ice Queen of Halo Works get pulled through his cramped living space by a 60-pound force of nature in a purple dress. The afternoon unfolded with unexpected ease. Maisie showed Veronica her turtle, her drawings, her collection of smooth rocks from the park, and her elaborate ranking system for all the doctors and nurses at Chicago Memorial. Veronica listened with the attention she probably gave quarterly reports, asking questions and responding with genuine interest rather than condescension. The gift bag contained art supplies, high-quality markers, sketch pads, colored pencils, and a wooden box that looked expensive. Maisie's eyes went huge. These are for professional artists, she whispered. Then they're perfect for you, Veronica said. Your father tells me you're very talented. Maisie beamed, then immediately began a detailed illustration of Professor Shellsworth's origin story, which apparently involved a secret agent turtle academy and international espionage. Jonah made lunch, nothing fancy, just grilled cheese and tomato soup, and they ate at his small kitchen table with Maisie narrating Professor Shellsworth's adventures between bites. Veronica ate without complaint, even though Jonah suspected this was several tax brackets below her usual meals. After lunch, Maisie's energy flagged. The cancer and the treatment did that. Hours of brightness followed by sudden crashes. She curled up on the couch with her head in Jonah's lap, fighting sleep. You should rest, baby, Jonah said, stroking what little hair she had left. But Miss Veronica just got here, Maisie mumbled. I'm not tired. I'll still be here when you wake up, Veronica said from the armchair. She'd kicked off her shoes, expensive flats that probably cost more than Jonah's monthly grocery bill, and tucked her legs under her like someone settling in. I promise. You promise? I promise. Satisfied, Maisie let her eyes close. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep. Jonah stayed very still, unwilling to disturb her, and found himself meeting Veronica's eyes across the quiet room. She's remarkable, Veronica said softly. She is. She's... Jonah's voice caught. She's everything good I've ever done. She loves you completely. You can see it in how she looks at you. I just hope I'm enough, that what I can give her is enough. Veronica leaned forward, her expression intent. You are. You're fighting for her every single day. You're there, you're present. That's everything, Pierce. That's what matters. Is it? Jonah heard the bitterness in his own voice. Because some days I feel like I'm failing her, like no matter how hard I fight, it's not going to be enough. The cancer doesn't care how much I love her. No, it doesn't. Veronica's voice was steady. But she'll remember that you tried, that you were there, that you didn't give up. She paused. Claire, my daughter. She died before I could get to the hospital. I never got to hold her hand. I never got to tell her I loved her one more time. She died thinking I chose work over her, and she was right. The apartment was very quiet except for Maisie's breathing and the distant sound of traffic. You're not that person anymore, Jonah said. I'm trying not to be. Veronica's smile was sad. But 17 years of being one way doesn't disappear overnight. I'm learning, slowly. You're here. That's not nothing. It's everything, Veronica corrected. Being here. That's the lesson I missed. That presence is the only gift that matters. They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon light shifted across the room, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Maisie slept, secure in her father's presence. Veronica watched them with an expression Jonah couldn't quite name, longing and regret and something tender and new. Eventually, Maisie stirred, blinking awake with the confusion of someone who'd fallen asleep mid-conversation. Did I sleep long? Just a little while, Jonah said. Maisie sat up, saw Veronica still in the armchair, and smiled. You kept your promise. I always keep my promises to you, Veronica said. Good. Maisie stretched, then announced, Now you have to play Go Fish with us. It's tradition. So they played Go Fish on the coffee table, Maisie winning with suspicious frequency, while Jonah suspected she was cheating but couldn't prove it. Veronica played with the competitive intensity she probably brought to corporate negotiations, which made Maisie laugh until her sides hurt. When Veronica finally left as the sun was setting, Maisie hugged her at the door, a spontaneous, fierce embrace that clearly surprised them both. Veronica knelt down, hugging her back with careful gentleness, and Jonah saw her eyes close like someone holding something precious. Will you come back? Maisie asked. Every week, Veronica said. If that's okay with you and your dad. It's perfect. Maisie pulled back, studying Veronica's face with that unnerving intensity children have. You're not so sad anymore. Your eyes are different. Veronica touched Maisie's cheek. That's because you're magic, sweetheart. After she'd gone, Jonah helped Maisie get ready for bed. As he tucked her in, she looked up at him with satisfaction. She's coming back every week, Dad. I heard. That means she really likes us. It does. Mrs. Chen's going to be so excited about the romance. There's no romance, Mai. Maisie just smiled, the knowing smile of someone who saw things adults tried to hide. Not yet, she said. But there will be. And as Jonah turned out the light, leaving only the glow of her nightlight casting soft shadows across the room, he wondered if his 6-year-old daughter might be the wisest person he knew. Veronica kept her promise. Every Friday at 6 p.m., after the markets closed and the office began its weekend exodus, she would drive from Halo Works to Jonah's apartment in Lincoln Park, still in her work clothes but with her armor gradually softening, the severe suits giving way to slacks and blouses, the punishing heels replaced by flats, her hair more often down than up. She'd arrive with takeout because Jonah had mentioned once that cooking exhausted him, and she'd taken it as a problem to solve rather than a complaint to dismiss. The first few visits were careful, choreographed, everyone performing their designated roles. Veronica as the concerned mentor, Jonah as the grateful employee, Maisie as the charming child who made everything easier by filling silences with chatter about Professor Shellsworth's latest adventures, or the rankings she'd developed for every Disney princess based on practical leadership qualities. But by the 4th week, something shifted. Veronica arrived to find Jonah on the living room floor surrounded by Maisie's art supplies, his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up, helping his daughter create an elaborate poster about turtle conservation for her school presentation. She'd dropped her bag by the door and joined them without asking, her expensive slacks getting smudged with marker as she helped Maisie draw a surprisingly accurate sea turtle. You're good at this, Jonah had said, watching her sketch. I minored in art history, Veronica replied, not looking up from her drawing. Seemed practical at the time. My mother nearly had a stroke. Why art history if you were going into business? Veronica's hand had paused, marker hovering above paper. Because for 4 years I wanted to be someone who cared about beautiful things instead of profitable things. It didn't take. She resumed drawing. Or maybe it did, and I just forgot for a while. Maisie had looked between them with knowing eyes, then announced that Miss Veronica should sign the poster too, because she was part of the team now. So Veronica Slate, CEO worth more than some small countries, signed her name in careful script next to a 6-year-old's enthusiastic scrawl and a single father's tired but loving contribution. That night, after Maisie had fallen asleep mid-sentence while telling them about a boy named Marcus who ate paste, Jonah and Veronica sat on the small balcony that overlooked a sliver of the park. The April air was cool but not cold, carrying the green smell of spring finally winning its war against winter. Jonah had made coffee, terrible coffee, but Veronica drank it anyway, and they sat in the kind of comfortable silence that only developed between people who'd stopped performing for each other. She had a scan yesterday, Jonah said quietly, staring at his mug. Dr. Okafor called this morning with results. Veronica's entire body tensed. And? Tumor's shrinking, not gone, but smaller. The treatment's working. His voice cracked. It's actually working. Veronica set down her mug and did something that surprised them both. She reached over and took his hand. Her palm was warm, her grip firm, and Jonah found himself holding on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the ground. That's incredible, she said. Jonah, that's... I know. He was crying now, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of hope. I was so afraid to hope. Every time I let myself believe she might be okay, it felt like jinxing it. But Okafor said, if this trajectory continues, Maisie could be in remission by fall. Veronica's thumb traced circles on the back of his hand, an unconscious gesture of comfort. She's going to make it. She's too stubborn not to. She gets that from Hannah, Jonah said. Her mom. Hannah was... He stopped, swallowed. I haven't talked about her much. Didn't want to make things weird. Tell me, Veronica said. I want to know. So he did. He told her about Hannah Chen, who'd been a second-grade teacher with a laugh that could fill rooms and a passionate belief that children were humanity's best hope. About how they'd met at a bookstore, both reaching for the same novel, and ended up talking for 3 hours in the coffee shop next door. About their wedding in her parents' backyard, small and perfect, with lanterns strung between trees. About Maisie's birth, how Hannah had labored for 16 hours and never once complained, how she'd held their daughter and cried with joy so pure it hurt to witness. About the morning he'd found her collapsed in their bedroom, already gone, an aneurysm that had been hiding in her brain like a time bomb no one knew to look for. The worst part, Jonah said, his voice rough, was that I'd been annoyed with her that morning. She'd forgotten to pick up milk, and I'd snapped at her about it. The last thing I said to my wife was irritated and petty, and then she died before I could take it back. Veronica's hand tightened on his. She knew you loved her. One annoyed morning doesn't erase years of devotion. Logically, I know that. But at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep, logic doesn't help much. No, Veronica agreed softly. It doesn't. She paused. Claire's last morning, the morning I should have stayed home, she'd wanted me to read her this book about a caterpillar. I told her I didn't have time, that Mommy had an important meeting. She cried, and I left anyway. Veronica's voice was barely audible. I chose a meeting about third-quarter projections over reading to my daughter, and she died thinking I didn't love her enough to stay. They sat with that, two people carrying guilt that would never fully fade, finding something like absolution in each other's presence. You're staying now, Jonah said finally. For Maisie. For me. That counts. Does it? Yes. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the living room she looked younger, more vulnerable. Hannah would have liked you, I think, once she got past being terrified of you. Veronica laughed, wet and thick. I would have liked her too. She raised an extraordinary child. We raised her together, past tense for Hannah, present tense for me. And now, Jonah hesitated. Now it feels like there's room for future tense too. If you want it. Veronica met his eyes, and something passed between them that was too fragile to name, but too real to ignore. "I want it," she said. "I'm terrified of it, but I want it." Neither of them moved to close the distance between them. It was too soon, too raw, too complicated. But the possibility hung in the air like the smell of spring, promising that after enough winter, things could bloom again. Inside, Maisie slept peacefully, unaware that the two adults on the balcony were slowly, carefully, beginning to build something that might someday hold all three of them. The weeks folded into months with surprising speed. Maisie's health stabilized, then improved. Her energy returned in bursts, and she started attending school more regularly, coming home with stories about her friends and complaints about homework that Jonah celebrated because they were so beautifully, wonderfully normal. Veronica became a fixture in their lives, her Friday visits expanding into Saturday morning breakfasts and Sunday afternoon walks through the park where Maisie would run ahead. Her small bald head covered by colorful hats Veronica kept buying despite Jonah's protest that she was spoiling her. "I have 17 years of unused maternal instinct," Veronica had said, watching Maisie feed ducks that probably shouldn't be fed. "Let me spoil her." At work, something was changing too. Jonah noticed it first in small ways. Veronica smiled more in meetings. Her criticism was constructive rather than cruel, and she'd started a program allowing flexible schedules for parents. The analysts who'd once lived in terror of her presence began staying after meetings to ask questions, and she answered with patience that shocked everyone, including herself. Morrison cornered Jonah in the break room one afternoon in June, his expression caught between confusion and suspicion. "What did you do to her?" "To who?" "To Slate, the Ice Queen. She's—" Morrison gestured helplessly. "She's human now. She asked about my mother's surgery. She knew my mother was having surgery. What did you do?" Jonah had just smiled. "I didn't do anything. She did it herself." But that wasn't entirely true. What happened was more complicated, more mutual. Veronica was learning to be human again, yes, but Jonah was learning too. Learning that accepting help wasn't weakness, that building a life meant letting people in, that loving someone new didn't erase the someone you'd lost. They were teaching each other without meaning to, the way people do when they stop hiding their broken pieces and start fitting them together. By July, Maisie's hair had started growing back, soft and downy like a baby bird. She was absurdly vain about it, checking her reflection constantly and asking if she looked like a real girl again. Jonah and Veronica both assured her she'd always been real, but privately they celebrated this visible sign of healing. The evening everything changed started ordinarily enough. Veronica had arrived for Friday dinner to find Maisie in an uncharacteristically quiet mood, curled up on the couch with Professor Shellsworth, staring at nothing. "Hey, sweetheart," Veronica said, sitting beside her. "Everything okay?" Maisie shrugged. "Marcus asked me if I was going to die." Jonah, who'd been setting the table, froze. Veronica's expression went very still. "What did you tell him?" Veronica asked carefully. "I said I don't know. Nobody knows." Maisie's voice was small. "But it made me think about dying, and I got scared." Jonah came to sit on Maisie's other side, and she immediately crawled into his lap like she had when she was smaller. He held her, and Veronica watched them, something fierce and protective rising in her chest. "Being scared is okay," Jonah said into his daughter's hair. "I'm scared sometimes too." "You are?" "Every day. But you know what? The doctors say you're getting better. The scans show the tumor shrinking. Every week you're stronger." "But Marcus said cancer always comes back." "Marcus," Veronica said with more force than intended, "is 7 years old and doesn't know what he's talking about." Maisie looked at her and Veronica softened. "Sometimes cancer comes back," she admitted, "because lying to children was worse than scaring them. Sometimes it doesn't, but right now, you're winning. And every day you keep winning is a day you get to be here with people who love you." She reached out, tucking a strand of new hair behind Maisie's ear. "That's not nothing, sweetheart. That's everything." Maisie considered this, her face serious in that way that made her look far older than 6. "If I die, will you take care of my dad?" The question landed like a grenade in the quiet room. Jonah's arms tightened around his daughter. Veronica felt something crack open in her chest. "You're not going to die," Veronica said, and her voice shook. But yes, if something happened, which it won't, I would take care of your dad. I promise. And Professor Shellsworth? And Professor Shellsworth. Satisfied, Maisie relaxed slightly. Okay, I just needed to know someone would look after them. Because dying would be sad, but them being alone would be sadder. Jonah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Baby, you're going to outlive us all out of sheer stubbornness. Probably, Maisie agreed. Then, with the lightning-fast mood changes of children, she brightened. Can we have ice cream for dinner? No, Jonah and Veronica said simultaneously, then looked at each other and smiled despite everything. They had pasta instead, and Maisie's darkness lifted as quickly as it had descended. But later, after she'd gone to bed, Jonah and Veronica sat on the balcony again, the July heat making the air thick and close. She thinks about death, Jonah said. A 6-year-old shouldn't have to think about death. No, but she does, and she's handling it better than most adults would. Veronica paused. She asked if I'd take care of you. I know, I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. Stop. Veronica turned to face him. Don't apologize. She was asking because she sees what we've been avoiding talking about. Jonah's heart kicked against his ribs. Which is that this, Veronica gestured between them, stopped being mentorship or friendship weeks ago, maybe months ago, and we've been pretending otherwise because acknowledging it feels dangerous. The air between them crackled with everything unsaid. Jonah swallowed hard. Veronica, I'm in love with you, she said, and her voice was steady even though her hands trembled. I'm in love with you and with Maisie, and it terrifies me because the last time I loved someone this much, I destroyed it through neglect and selfishness. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. It's not fair to any of us. Jonah stood, crossed the small space between them, and cupped her face in his hands. I'm in love with you too, he said. Have been for months. But I kept thinking, what if Maisie gets worse? What if I'm asking you to walk into tragedy? What if I'm being selfish, pulling you into this complicated, terrifying situation? You're not pulling me anywhere, Veronica said fiercely. I'm walking in with my eyes open. I know the risks. I know it might hurt. But Jonah, not being with you, not being part of this family you and Maisie are building, that hurts more. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, a question more than a statement. She answered by pulling him closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, 17 years of frozen heart thawing all at once. They kissed like people who'd been holding their breath and finally remembered how to breathe, like survivors finding each other in the wreckage, like two broken things discovering they fit together better than they'd ever been whole. When they finally pulled apart, both were shaking. Veronica pressed her forehead to his, her breath coming fast. Maisie's going to be insufferable about this. Jonah laughed, wet and rough. She's been planning our wedding since week 2. Has she? Complete with a guest list that includes Professor Shellsworth and every nurse at Chicago Memorial. Veronica smiled against his lips. She has excellent taste. They kissed again, slower this time, learning the shape of this new thing between them. Inside, Maisie slept peacefully, unaware that the family she'd been engineering was finally, officially coming together. August arrived with oppressive heat and a routine that felt almost normal. Veronica spent most nights at the apartment now, keeping clothes in Jonah's closet and toiletries in his bathroom, the transition from visitor to resident happening so gradually that no one could pinpoint when it became official. Maisie was delighted, treating Veronica's presence as validation of her matchmaking skills, and frequently reminding them that she'd known all along this would happen. Work had shifted too. Veronica had promoted Jonah to senior analyst, a real promotion, not charity, and he'd started mentoring junior employees the way she'd once mentored him, though with significantly more kindness. They kept their relationship private at the office, not from shame, but from a shared desire to keep something precious separate from the corporate machinery. Still, people noticed. It was impossible not to notice how Veronica smiled when Jonah entered meetings, how he steadied her with just a look when board members pushed back on her more progressive policies. Morrison figured it out first, cornering Jonah after a presentation with a knowing grin. You're sleeping with the CEO. I'm in a relationship with Veronica, Jonah corrected. There's a difference. A huge difference. One could get you fired, the other could get you married. Morrison's grin widened. For what it's worth, she's different because of you. Better. The whole company's better. So thanks for that. It was the closest Morrison would come to approval, and Jonah accepted it with a nod. That evening, Jonah came home to find Veronica and Maisie in the kitchen, both covered in flour, attempting to make cookies. The kitchen looked like a baking supply store had exploded. Veronica's hair was dusted white, and Maisie had flour handprints on her shirt and face. They were laughing, real, full-body laughter, and the sound stopped Jonah in the doorway. This, he thought, this is what happiness looks like. We're making cookies, Maisie announced unnecessarily. Veronica said she's never made cookies before, which is tragic, so I'm teaching her. I'm a terrible student, Veronica admitted, holding up a misshapen blob of dough. I don't think this is right. It's perfect, Maisie assured her. All cookies are beautiful on the inside. Jonah joined them, and they finished the batch together, lumpy, irregular cookies that tasted better than they looked. They ate them warm from the oven, and Maisie declared it the best day ever, even better than the day she'd seen 3 dogs at the park simultaneously. Later, after Maisie was asleep, Jonah and Veronica cleaned the kitchen in comfortable silence. He washed, she dried, moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. I talked to my lawyer this week, Veronica said casually, wiping a mixing bowl. Jonah's hands stilled in the soapy water. Okay? About adding Maisie to my insurance, as a dependent. Veronica set down the bowl, not looking at him. And about drawing up documents that would give me legal guardianship if something happened to you. I know it's presumptuous. I know we haven't talked about long-term plans, but I need to know she'd be protected, that she'd be taken care of. Jonah turned to face her, his hands dripping. You want to be Maisie's legal guardian. I want to be her family, Veronica corrected. In every way that matters. I know I can't replace Hannah. I would never try. But I can be another person who loves her unconditionally, another safety net, another parent. She finally met his eyes. If you'll let me. Jonah crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she gasped. Yes, he said into her hair. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. She held him back, and they stood in the tiny kitchen with its mismatched cabinets and outdated appliances, building a future neither of them had imagined 6 months ago. We should tell Maisie, Veronica said. Make it official. If we're doing this, we do it right. So the next morning, a Saturday bright with late summer sun, they sat Maisie down at the kitchen table and told her. Veronica explained about the guardianship papers, about what it meant, about how she wanted to be part of Maisie's life permanently, legally, irrevocably. Maisie listened with the gravity of someone receiving important news, then said, So you're going to be my mom? Veronica's breath caught. I'm going to be another person who loves you like a mom does. You already had a mom, Hannah, and nobody can replace her. But if you want, I can be my bonus mom, Maisie said decisively. Like a bonus level in a video game. Extra special. Veronica laughed, her eyes wet. Bonus mom, I love that. Does this mean we're a family now? Maisie asked. Like, officially? Jonah and Veronica looked at each other, then back at Maisie. Yeah, baby, Jonah said. Officially. Maisie pumped her fist in victory. Finally. This took forever. I've been working on this since April. You have not been working on this, Jonah protested. Dad, I literally told you she should be your girlfriend on day 1. I've been matchmaking for months. You're welcome. Maisie stood, clearly considering the matter settled. Now can we go to the zoo? Families go to the zoo. So they went to the zoo, the 3 of them, and walked through exhibits holding hands, Maisie in the middle, swinging between her dad and her bonus mom, her laughter carrying across the pathways. Strangers smiled at them, seeing a family enjoying a perfect summer day, unaware of the cancer and grief and hard-won healing that had brought them together. That night, as Veronica helped Maisie brush her teeth, the girl looked up at her with serious eyes. I'm glad you stayed, she said. That night at the hospital. I'm glad you didn't leave. Veronica knelt down to Maisie's height. Me too, sweetheart. Staying was the best decision I ever made. Do you still miss Claire? The question didn't hurt the way it once would have. Every day. But being with you and your dad, it doesn't make missing her hurt less. It just makes the hurt more bearable. Maisie hugged her, small arms fierce around Veronica's neck. I think Claire would be happy you found us. Veronica held her, breathing in the smell of children's toothpaste and strawberry shampoo, and thought that maybe Maisie was right. Maybe Claire would be happy. Maybe Hannah would be too. Maybe the people they'd lost were cheering for them from wherever the dead went, hoping the living would find reasons to keep living. I think she would be too, Veronica whispered. I really think she would. September brought cooler air and Maisie's returned to school full-time. Her scans continued to show improvement, and Dr. Okafor started using words like remission and long-term prognosis with cautious optimism. Life had developed a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Work, school, dinners together, weekends in the park. Maisie's increasingly elaborate stories about Professor Shellsworth's adventures in international turtle diplomacy. But on a Thursday in late September, that rhythm shattered. Jonah's phone rang during a meeting. He ignored it. Meetings with Veronica present demanded full attention. But then it rang again. And again. When he saw Chicago Memorial's number, his blood turned to ice. I have to take this, he said, already standing, already knowing. Veronica's face went white. She dismissed the room with a gesture and followed him into the hallway where he answered with shaking hands. Mr. Pierce, this is Nurse Hoffman. Maisie had an episode at school. Severe headache, vomiting, disorientation. The school called an ambulance. She's here now. The words came from very far away, filtered through a roaring in Jonah's ears. Is she? She's stable. But Dr. Okafor wants to run tests. Can you come now? I'm coming. He couldn't finish. The phone dropped from his hand. Veronica caught him as his knees buckled, her arms strong around him. We're going. Right now. I'm driving. They made it to the hospital in a blur of speed and terror. Dr. Okafor met them in the same hallway where they'd waited months ago, her face professionally neutral in a way that made Jonah want to scream. We're running a CT scan, she said. Maisie's conscious and stable, but the symptoms are concerning. The headache's intensity, the sudden onset. We need to rule out several possibilities. The cancer's back, Jonah said flatly. That's what you're not saying. I'm saying we need more information before we can determine anything. Dr. Okafor's voice was kind but firm. The scan will take about an hour, then we'll know more. An hour. 60 minutes. 3,600 seconds of not knowing if his daughter's brief remission was over, if the cancer had returned with a vengeance, if all their hope had been a cruel joke. Veronica's hand found his. We'll wait together, she said. So they waited. They sat in the hallway on the same uncomfortable chairs, not speaking because there were no words for this particular terror. Other families moved around them, some celebrating recoveries, others receiving bad news, all of them caught in the machinery of illness and healing that ground on, indifferent to human suffering. Jonah thought about Maisie's question months ago. If I die, will you take care of my dad? He thought about how easily children accepted mortality, how they understood what adults spent lifetimes denying. He thought about Hannah, about how he'd failed to save her, about whether he was about to fail to save his daughter, too. Stop, Veronica said quietly. I can hear you spiraling. How can I not? What if... We don't know anything yet. Her grip on his hand tightened. We wait. We hope. And whatever the scan shows, we deal with it together. I can't lose her, Jonah said, and his voice broke completely. I can't. She's everything. I know. Veronica pulled him against her, and he buried his face in her shoulder while she held him together through sheer force of will. I know. They stayed like that until Dr. Okafor emerged from the scanning room, her expression unreadable. Both Jonah and Veronica stood, hands still clasped, bracing for whatever came next. The scan is clear, Dr. Okafor said, and Jonah's knees nearly gave out again. No new tumor growth, no cancer. The relief was so intense it felt like pain. Then what? Scar tissue, Dr. Okafor explained. From the radiation therapy. It happens sometimes. The scarring puts pressure on surrounding tissue. causing symptoms that mimic tumor growth. It's uncomfortable and scary, but it's not life-threatening. We can manage it with anti-inflammatories and monitoring. So she's okay? Veronica asked, her voice thin. She's okay. The remission is holding. This was just her body healing in a complicated way. Dr. Okafor smiled. You can see her now. She's been asking for both of you. They found Maisie sitting up in bed, looking small and tired but very much alive. When she saw them, she smiled, that smile that destroyed and rebuilt Jonah simultaneously. The cancer didn't come back, she announced. It's just my brain being dramatic. Jonah laughed, a sound caught between relief and residual terror. He sat on the bed and pulled her into his arms, holding her like he'd never let go. You scared me, he said into her hair. I scared me too, Maisie admitted, but I'm okay now. Dr. Okafor said my brain is just throwing a tantrum because it doesn't like being poked with radiation. Veronica sat on the other side of the bed, her hand finding Maisie's. You're sure you're okay? I'm sure. My head still hurts, but they gave me medicine. Maisie looked between them, reading their faces with unnerving accuracy. You both thought I was dying, didn't you? There was no point lying to her. Yes, Jonah said. For about an hour we thought, but I'm not. Maisie squeezed both their hands. I'm not dying. The cancer's gone and it's going to stay gone, and we're going to be a family for a really long time. She said it with such conviction that they almost believed her. Right? Right, but, Veronica said fiercely, but for a really long time. Good. Maisie yawned, the medication making her drowsy. Because I have plans, big plans, and they require both of you being around. What kind of plans? Jonah asked. Secret plans? Maisie said mysteriously. Her eyes drifted closed. But they involve cake. And maybe a puppy. And definitely you two getting married because, seriously, what's taking so long? She fell asleep mid-sentence, her hands still holding theirs. Jonah and Veronica looked at each other across their daughter. Not bonus daughter, not honorary daughter, just daughter. And something solidified between them. The terror of almost losing her had stripped away any remaining hesitation. Life was too short, too fragile, too precious to waste time pretending they weren't already committed for the long haul. She's right, Veronica said quietly. What is taking so long? Jonah smiled, exhausted and relieved and more certain than he'd been about anything in years. Nothing at all. 3 days after the scare, Jonah woke at dawn to find Veronica's side of the bed empty. He found her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her laptop balanced on the coffee table, surrounded by papers and sticky notes, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression was both nervous and excited. I couldn't sleep, she said. So I've been planning. Planning what? Our future. She gestured at the papers. Floor plans, financial spreadsheets, photographs of houses. We need more space. This apartment is wonderful, but it's barely big enough for 2 people, let alone 3. And if we're really doing this, building a family, we should do it properly. Jonah sat beside her, picking up one of the photographs. A brownstone in Lincoln Park with a small yard and wide front steps. This is a $4 million house, Veronica. It's also 3 blocks from Maisie's school and has enough room for all of us. She pulled up another photo on her laptop. Or there's this one in Wicker Park. Slightly less expensive, bigger yard, needs some work, but the bones are good. You're house hunting. I'm nesting, Veronica corrected, which is apparently something I do now. I'm as surprised as you are. She closed the laptop and turned to face him fully. I know this is fast. I know we've only been together since July. But Jonah, that scare with Maisie, it reminded me that we don't get unlimited time. None of us do. And I don't want to waste another second pretending this is temporary or casual. I want permanence. I want commitment. I want to marry me, Jonah finished, his heart hammering. Veronica's breath caught. Is that... Are you asking or are you answering? Both. He took her hands, holding them between his own. I was going to wait, find the perfect moment, the perfect ring, do it properly. But you're right. We don't get unlimited time. And I don't want to wait anymore. He smiled, feeling tears prick his eyes. Veronica Slate, will you marry me? Will you be Maisie's bonus mom officially? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? You already deserve me, Veronica said, her voice thick. You taught me how to be human again, how to feel, how to love. She was crying now, properly crying, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry both of you. They kissed there on the living room floor, surrounded by house listings and financial plans. And it felt like sealing a promise that had been building since that first night in the hospital when Veronica had chosen to stay instead of run. Behind them, a small voice said, "Finally." They turned to find Maisie standing in the hallway in her pajamas, Professor Shellsworth tucked under one arm, her expression radiating pure satisfaction. "How long have you been standing there?" Jonah asked. "Long enough to know you're getting married, and we're getting a house with a yard." Maisie patted over and inserted herself between them, wrapping one arm around each of their necks. "I told you this would happen. I'm an excellent matchmaker." "You're a menace," Veronica said fondly, kissing the top of Maisie's head where soft hair was now growing in earnest. "I'm a menace who's going to be a flower girl," Maisie corrected. "And Professor Shellsworth needs to be in the wedding too. He's part of this family." "Of course he is," Jonah said solemnly. "We'll get him a tiny tuxedo." Maisie's face lit up. "Can we really?" "We can really," Veronica confirmed, though finding a turtle-sized tuxedo might be challenging. "I'll make one," Maisie declared. "I'm very crafty." She yawned, still tired from the medication she was taking for the scar tissue inflammation. "Can we have pancakes to celebrate?" So they made pancakes at 6 in the morning. The three of them crowded into the tiny kitchen that would soon be replaced by something bigger. Maisie sat on the counter directing operations while Jonah and Veronica worked in tandem, their movements synchronized in the way of people who'd learned to orbit each other. They ate breakfast as the sun rose over Chicago, painting the apartment in shades of gold and amber, and made plans for a future that felt suddenly, gloriously possible. Over the next weeks, life accelerated into a flurry of activity that left them all slightly breathless. Veronica hired a real estate agent, a fierce woman named Patricia, who took one look at their requirements and found them a perfect house within 48 hours. It was the brownstone in Lincoln Park, the $4 million one, and when Jonah protested about the cost, Veronica had simply said, "I have the money, you have the family, let me invest in what matters." The house needed work. The previous owners had loved the color mauve far too much, but the structure was sound and the location was perfect. Maisie would have her own room, large enough for both her bed and an elaborate habitat for Professor Shellsworth. There was a guest room that would become a nursery if they ever decided to expand their family, a study where Jonah could work from home when Maisie needed him, a kitchen big enough for all of them to cook together without constantly bumping into each other, and a backyard. Small by suburban standards, but massive by city ones, with room for a garden and maybe eventually a dog when Maisie inevitably wore them down. They closed on the house in early October, and the moving process revealed just how thoroughly their lives had merged. Veronica's expensive furniture mixed with Jonah's hand-me-downs and Maisie's collection of art projects. Books from all three of them filled the built-in shelves in the living room, business text next to children's stories next to Veronica's art history volumes. The refrigerator became a gallery of Maisie's drawings, held up by magnets Veronica bought from the Art Institute. Mrs. Chen came to the housewarming party they threw in late October, bringing homemade dumplings and pretending not to cry when she saw how happy they all were. Morrison came too, along with a handful of colleagues from Halo Works who'd watched Veronica's transformation with fascination. Dr. Okafor stopped by briefly between shifts, bringing a card signed by all of Maisie's nurses at Chicago Memorial. "You're a miracle," she told Maisie privately, checking the girl's eyes and reflexes with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "Your scans are perfect. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I'm being happy," Maisie said seriously, "and eating vegetables, and taking my medicine, and having a family." "Those are excellent strategies," Dr. Okafor agreed. She pulled Jonah aside before leaving, her expression thoughtful. "I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen a lot of children fight cancer. And I've noticed something. The ones who have strong support systems, who have love and stability and reasons to keep fighting, they tend to do better. Not always. Medicine isn't that simple, but often enough that I believe it matters. She glanced at where Veronica was helping Maisie show their guests Professor Shellsworth's new habitat. Whatever you three are doing, it's working. Keep it up. The wedding planning happened in stolen moments between work and Maisie's school schedule and the ongoing monitoring appointments that still made Jonah's stomach clench with anxiety. They decided on something small, just immediate friends and the family that mattered. Mrs. Chen, Morrison, Dr. Okafor and a few nurses, Patricia the real estate agent who'd become an unexpected friend, and a handful of colleagues Veronica actually liked rather than merely tolerated. Maisie appointed herself wedding coordinator, creating elaborate plans involving doves and ice sculptures and a 7-tier cake. When Jonah gently suggested that might be excessive, she'd countered with, "Dad, this is your only wedding to Veronica. It has to be spectacular." "Actually," Veronica had said carefully, "we were thinking of something quieter, more intimate, maybe in the hospital garden where your dad and I really became a family." Maisie had considered this, then nodded with the gravity of someone making an important concession. "Okay, but I'm still wearing a princess dress, and Professor Shellsworth still gets a tuxedo." "Non-negotiable terms," Jonah agreed. They set the date for November 15th, giving them just enough time to arrange the details without overthinking it. The hospital's garden was available, a small oasis of green in the middle of medical machinery, the place where scared families came to breathe and hope and occasionally pray to whatever they believed in. It seemed fitting. This space that had witnessed so much fear and healing would now witness their commitment to each other. The morning of November 15th arrived cold and bright, the kind of Chicago autumn day that made the city look like something from a postcard. Jonah woke early in their new house. Technically, he and Maisie's house, since Veronica had spent the night at a hotel because she insisted on respecting at least one tradition, and found his daughter already awake, standing at her window in her pajamas. "Big day," she said without turning around. "Biggest day," Jonah agreed, coming to stand beside her. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified." "Why?" Maisie looked up at him, genuinely confused. "You love her. She loves you. You're already living together. This is just making it official." "That's what makes it terrifying," Jonah said. "Making it official means admitting how much it matters, how much I need her, how destroyed I'd be if you lost her like you lost Mom," Maisie finished. She took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "Dad, you're always going to be scared of losing people you love. But you can't not love them just because you're scared. That's not how it works." Jonah looked at his 7-year-old daughter. When had she turned 7? Time was moving so fast now that she was healthy, and marveled at her wisdom. "When did you get so smart?" "I was always smart. You just notice more now that I'm not dying." She said it casually, but Jonah heard the weight underneath. Maisie knew how close they'd come. She'd remember it her whole life, this year of sickness and fear and unlikely healing. "You're right," he said, "about all of it. Thank you, baby." "You're welcome. Now can we have pancakes? I need fuel for being an excellent flower girl." They made pancakes together, just the two of them in their new kitchen with its granite counters and fancy appliances that still felt too nice to belong to them. Professor Shellsworth watched from his habitat, serene and distinguished in the tiny bow tie Maisie had somehow managed to construct. "I'm glad it's Veronica," Maisie said through a mouthful of pancake. "Not because I don't miss Mom, I do, but Veronica fits. She fits with us." "She does," Jonah agreed. "Your mom would have liked her, I think." "Mom would have loved her, because Veronica makes you smile again. Real smiles, not sad ones." Maisie reached across the table and touched his hand. "It's okay to be happy, Dad. Mom would want that." The wedding was at 2 p.m., and by noon Jonah was in his bedroom trying to knot his tie for the 7th time, while Morrison sat on the bed offering completely unhelpful commentary. "You're sweating," Morrison observed. "That's not a good look for a groom." "I'm aware." "Have you written your vows?" Jonah gestured to a piece of paper on the dresser, covered in crossed-out lines and smudged ink. "I've written 17 versions. They're all terrible." Morrison picked up the paper, scanned it, and laughed. "These aren't terrible, they're honest." He pointed to one paragraph. This one, about how she taught you that broken things can heal if they find the right people to heal with. That's good. Keep that. It's not too sentimental? Pierce, you're marrying a woman you met while she was systematically destroying your soul in a boardroom, and she's marrying you after you taught her how to be human again. The whole thing is sentiment. Lean into it. Morrison had a point. Jonah pocketed the vows, version 17, full of crossed-out words and coffee stains and truth, and checked his reflection one more time. He looked nervous but happy, and that seemed appropriate. Downstairs, Maisie was ready and waiting in a dress that was indeed princess-worthy, light blue with sparkles and layers of tulle. She'd let Veronica help her choose it during a shopping trip that had apparently involved trying on 47 options and consuming an inadvisable amount of ice cream. Her hair, now grown into about 2 inches, had been styled with small clips shaped like butterflies. "You look beautiful," Jonah said, his throat tight. "I know," Maisie replied without a trace of false modesty. "Are you ready? Because Veronica is already at the hospital, and we're supposed to be there in 30 minutes. They arrived with 15 minutes to spare, pulling up to Chicago Memorial in Morrison's car since Jonah was too nervous to drive. The garden had been transformed by the hospital's events coordinator, someone Veronica had apparently charmed into helping, with white chairs arranged in neat rows and flowers strung between the trees, despite the November chill. It was small and simple and perfect. The guests were already seated, maybe 30 people total, everyone who mattered most. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Dr. Okafor sat in the front row in a dress instead of scrubs, looking strange and wonderful. The nurses from Maisie's floor had come on their lunch break, still in uniform, grinning and waving. And at the front, under an arch decorated with late-season roses, stood Veronica. She wore a simple dress in cream, elegant and understated, her hair down in waves around her shoulders. No severe suit, no corporate armor, just a woman who'd learned to be vulnerable again. When she saw Jonah, her face transformed with a smile so bright it hurt to look at directly. Maisie went first, walking down the aisle with careful steps, scattering flower petals she'd insisted on, even though it was November and flower petals were hard to source. She took her place beside Veronica, beaming with pride. Then it was Jonah's turn. He walked alone, no one to give him away because he was giving himself freely, and met Veronica under the arch with his heart hammering and his hands shaking. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back. The officiant, a friend of Veronica's from law school who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this, cleared her throat and began the ceremony. The standard words about love and commitment, about choosing each other every day, about building a life together through joy and sorrow. Jonah heard it all through the rushing in his ears, focused entirely on Veronica's face, on the way she was looking at him like he was something miraculous. When it came time for vows, Veronica went first. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, her hand steadier than his. "Jonah," she began, and her voice carried across the small garden. "6 months ago, I was drowning in a life I'd built to avoid feeling anything. I was successful and powerful and completely empty. Then you walked into my office with a box of belongings and a letter that broke my heart open. You didn't mean to save me. You were just trying to survive. But you showed me that survival isn't enough, that life requires vulnerability and risk, and the courage to love even when you know it might destroy you." She paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You and Maisie taught me that broken things can heal if they find the right people to heal with, that second chances exist, that it's never too late to become the person you were supposed to be." Her voice wavered. "I promise to be present, to choose you and Maisie every single day, to remember that work is just work, but family is everything, to never let fear make me cruel again, to love you both with everything I am and everything I'm learning to be." Jonah's vision blurred. He fumbled for his own paper, the 17 times revised vows, and when he spoke his voice cracked immediately. "Veronica, when Hannah died, I thought that was it. That I'd used up my allocation of love and happiness, and the rest of my life would just be survival and doing my best for Maisie." He had to stop, breathe, continue. "But you proved me wrong. You showed me that hearts can expand instead of just breaking, that losing someone doesn't mean you can't love someone else. It means you understand how precious love is." He looked at her directly. not reading anymore, just speaking from the rawest part of himself. You stayed. That first night in the hospital, when you could have walked away, you stayed. And you kept staying, over and over, until staying became belonging. I promise to never take that for granted, to honor your courage in choosing us. To build a life where presence matters more than productivity, where love matters more than anything else. To be your family, completely and forever. The officiant was dabbing at her own eyes now. The rings, she managed. Maisie produced them from a small bag she'd been clutching, simple gold bands that Veronica and Jonah had chosen together, inscribed inside with the date of that first hospital night. They exchanged them with shaking hands, sliding the metal onto each other's fingers while their witnesses watched and wept. By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois and the internet, the officiant said with a watery smile, I now pronounce you married. You may kiss. And they did. They kissed in the hospital garden where they'd first become a family, surrounded by people who'd witnessed their improbable journey, while Maisie cheered and Professor Shellsworth presumably looked on with distinguished approval from whatever pocket or bag Maisie had stashed him in. When they finally pulled apart, Veronica turned to Maisie and knelt down to her level. May I? She asked, gesturing to the child. You're supposed to ask if you can kiss me? Maisie looked confused. No. I'm asking if I can officially adopt you. If I can be your parent legally, not just emotionally. If you want that. Maisie's eyes went huge. She looked at Jonah, who nodded. We talked about it. Veronica wants to adopt you, if you're okay with it. You'd still be Maisie Pierce. We're not changing your name, but legally, Veronica would be your mother. One of your mothers, Veronica corrected softly. Hannah will always be your first mom. I would just be my bonus mom, Maisie interrupted. Officially. She threw her arms around Veronica's neck. Yes. Yes, I want that. I want us to be a real family. We already were, Veronica said into Maisie's hair. But now, it's official. The reception happened right there in the garden, with catered food from a nearby restaurant and a small cake that Maisie had insisted needed to have 3 tiers even if it was a small wedding. They ate and laughed and listened to short speeches from Mrs. Chen, who called them all stubborn and blessed in equal measure, and from Morrison, who made inappropriate jokes that somehow landed as sincere. Dr. Okafor presented Maisie with a cake shaped like Professor Shellsworth, because apparently she and the pediatric ward nurses had conspired. As the sun started to set and the November chill deepened, guests began to leave with hugs and well wishes. Soon it was just the 3 of them, Jonah, Veronica, and Maisie, standing in the garden where so much fear had transformed into hope. We're married, Veronica said, sounding slightly dazed. We're a family, Maisie corrected. There's a difference. There is, Jonah agreed. He pulled them both into a hug, the 3 of them forming a small circle in the gathering dark. And I'm never letting either of you go. Good, Veronica said against his shoulder. Because I'd hunt you down. Me too, Maisie added. I'm very persistent. They stood there as the temperature dropped and the hospital lights came on behind them, holding each other in the place where they'd almost lost everything and instead found more than they'd ever imagined possible. Where terror had become love, where brokenness had become healing, where 3 damaged people had formed something whole and perfect and entirely their own. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, though perhaps less than expected given how thoroughly their lives had already merged. The biggest change was paperwork. Veronica's lawyers finalized Maisie's adoption in January, and the moment the judge's signature made it official, all 3 of them had cried in the courtroom. Maisie now had 2 mothers on all her forms, one living and one not. And she treated this as perfectly normal because to her, it was. At school, she'd explain to anyone who asked, my first mom died, but then my dad met Veronica, who was really mean at first but got better, and now she's my bonus mom, and we're a family. The teachers had learned to just accept this narrative without question. Work continued to evolve too. Veronica had restructured HaloWorks into something that prioritized sustainable growth over quarterly panic, and the company was thriving in ways that surprised industry analysts. Jonah had been promoted again, VP of Analytics now, a position that came with actual authority and a salary that still made him uncomfortable. Morrison worked under him, which created a strange dynamic neither of them had quite figured out, but were managing through liberal use of sarcasm and mutual respect. The best part, though, was coming home. Every evening, Jonah and Veronica would arrive at the brownstone to find Maisie either doing homework at the kitchen table or drawing elaborate adventures for Professor Shellsworth, or building elaborate blanket forts in the living room. They'd cook dinner together, all three of them crowding the kitchen that was finally big enough, and eat while Maisie narrated her day in exhaustive detail. Veronica had taken to the domestic rituals with an enthusiasm that would have shocked anyone who'd known her 2 years ago. She learned to cook, not well, but adequately, and took pride in mastering basic things like properly scrambled eggs and pasta that didn't stick together. She attended every single one of Maisie's school events, sitting in tiny chairs designed for parents half her height and cheering with embarrassing enthusiasm. She'd even volunteered to help with the school art program, teaching second graders about color theory and perspective. "Who are you, and what have you done with Veronica Slate?" Morrison had asked once, watching her leave work early for a parent-teacher conference. "She's still in here," Veronica had replied. "She's just finally doing things that matter." But it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Saturday mornings in bed with Maisie squeezed between them, reading books until they all got hungry enough to make breakfast. Sunday afternoons in the park, watching Maisie play with other kids while Jonah and Veronica sat on a bench holding hands. Evenings after Maisie went to sleep, when they'd sit on their back porch and talk about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. One evening in February, as they sat wrapped in blankets against the cold, Veronica said something that made Jonah's heart skip. "I want another child." He turned to look at her, searching her face in the porch light. "Are you sure?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "After Claire, I thought I'd never have another child, that I didn't deserve one, that I'd just fail again." She pulled the blanket tighter. "But watching you with Maisie, being part of raising her, it's healed something I thought was permanently broken, and I want to try again, to have a baby with you, to do it right this time." Jonah's throat tightened. "I would love that. But Veronica, you need to know, you didn't fail Claire. You were grieving and lost, but you weren't a bad mother. You were a mother who worked too much. That's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" "No, because you've learned. You've changed. And you'd be an incredible mother to a new baby, just like you're an incredible mother to Maisie." Veronica's eyes filled. "What if something goes wrong? What if—" "Then we'll deal with it together," Jonah said firmly, "just like we've dealt with everything else." "But Veronica, you can't live your whole life afraid of loss. That's not living." She nodded, wiping her eyes. Okay, let's try." They started trying that night, and 3 months later in May, Veronica woke up at dawn and took a pregnancy test in the bathroom while Jonah slept. When she crawled back into bed and showed him the positive result, they both cried. Tears of joy and terror and overwhelming hope. Maisie, when they told her at breakfast, was predictably thrilled. "I'm going to be a big sister? This is the best news ever. Can we name the baby after Professor Shellsworth?" "Absolutely not," Veronica said, laughing through tears. "What if it's a turtle-themed name, like Shelley?" "We'll consider it," Jonah lied. The pregnancy was surprisingly easy, or maybe it just seemed easy compared to everything else they'd been through. Veronica experienced the standard discomforts, morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion that made her fall asleep during conference calls, strange food cravings that Jonah dutifully satisfied at odd hours. But she was glowing too, her body doing something she'd thought it might never do again, creating life with a man she loved while raising a daughter she adored. Her doctors were cautiously optimistic. At 42, Veronica was considered high risk, but all the tests came back normal. The baby was healthy, growing on schedule, a girl who showed up on ultrasounds looking stubborn and determined. "She has your chin," Jonah said, pointing at the grainy image. "She has your stubbornness," Veronica countered. "Look at how she's refusing to move for the technician." They argued about names for months. Maisie voted for increasingly ridiculous options. Princess Sparkle Turtle Pierce Slate was offered with complete seriousness. Jonah wanted something simple and strong. Veronica wanted something meaningful. In the end, it was Maisie who suggested it. They were looking at photos one evening, old pictures of Hannah that Jonah kept in an album, preserved memories of a life that felt both distant and immediate. Maisie pointed to one of Hannah laughing, her head thrown back, joy radiating from her. "She looks so happy," Maisie said wistfully. "I wish the baby could meet her." Veronica looked at Jonah, and understanding passed between them without words. "What if we named her Hannah?" Veronica asked carefully. "To honor your first mom, to keep her name alive." Maisie's face transformed. "Really? You'd do that? If your dad agrees." Jonah couldn't speak. He nodded, overwhelmed by the generosity of the gesture. Veronica naming her daughter after his dead wife, building a bridge between the family they'd been and the family they were becoming. "Hannah Pierce Slate," Maisie said, testing it out. "That's perfect." So Hannah it would be. Hannah, named for a woman who'd loved fiercely and died too young. Hannah, who would grow up knowing she carried the name of someone important. Hannah, who would be born into a family that had learned the hard way how precious life was. The months passed. Maisie's health remained stable. Her scans continued to show no signs of cancer, and Dr. Okafor started using the word cured with careful optimism. She was 8 now, tall and gangly, her hair grown back thick and dark. She'd become obsessed with marine biology, declaring her intention to study turtles professionally and name them all after members of her family. Veronica worked until she couldn't anymore, finally taking maternity leave in October when getting up from her desk required logistical planning. HaloWorks continued to function in her absence, which she found both reassuring and slightly insulting. Morrison had stepped up as interim CEO, proving himself more capable than anyone had expected, including Morrison himself. Jonah had taken parental leave too, coordinating with Veronica so they'd both be home when the baby arrived. They spent those last weeks nesting, setting up the nursery, washing tiny clothes, reading parenting books, and panicking about all the things they'd forgotten or never known. "I don't remember any of this with Maisie," Jonah admitted, staring at a complicated device that was apparently a bottle warmer. "That's because Hannah did most of it," Veronica said. "She'd gotten huge, her belly an impressive dome that made sleeping difficult and walking challenging. And now it's your turn to figure it out." "Our turn," he corrected, kissing her temple. "We're doing this together." Hannah Grace Pierce Slate arrived on November 3rd, 2 weeks early, and in a dramatic fashion that matched her mother's personality. Veronica's water broke during a grocery store trip, forcing an emergency rush to Chicago Memorial that involved Jonah panicking, Maisie providing surprisingly calm directions from the back seat, and at least 3 traffic laws being broken. The birth itself was fast, barely 4 hours from first contraction to final push. And when the doctor placed the squalling, red-faced baby on Veronica's chest, time seemed to stop. Veronica stared at her daughter with an expression of such profound awe that Jonah felt his own eyes burn. "She's perfect," Veronica whispered. "She's absolutely perfect." "She's wrinkly," Maisie observed from her position beside the bed, where she'd been allowed to stay for the birth after convincing every medical professional that she was mature enough. "But cute wrinkly, like a baby turtle." Hannah yelled her displeasure at being born, her tiny fists waving, and Veronica laughed, a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that Jonah had never heard from her before. They brought Hannah home 3 days later to a house that had been transformed by Mrs. Chen and Morrison into something resembling a nursery showroom. Balloons crowded the entryway, a banner reading "Welcome Home, Baby Hannah" hung slightly crooked in the living room, and casseroles filled the refrigerator because apparently that's what people did when babies arrived. Maisie had appointed herself chief baby monitor, a role she took with profound seriousness. She insisted on helping with every diaper change, every feeding, every bath. She'd sit beside Veronica while her mother nursed Hannah, providing running commentary on the baby's expressions and developing an elaborate theory about what each cry meant. "That's her hungry cry," Maisie would announce. "It's different from her sleepy cry, which is more whiny, and her diaper cry is angry. She's very expressive." "She's 3 weeks old," Jonah said, amused. "I don't think she has that much range yet." "You underestimate her," Maisie replied with the confidence of someone who'd decided she was an expert. "Hannah is very sophisticated, just like Professor Shellsworth." Veronica, exhausted and hormonal and happier than she'd ever been in her life, would catch Jonah's eye over their daughters' heads and smile. This the chaos and the sleepless nights, and the constant needs of two children. This was what she'd been missing for 17 years. This was what she'd built walls to avoid feeling because feeling it and losing it had nearly destroyed her. But now, holding Hannah while Maisie chattered beside her and Jonah made coffee in their kitchen, Veronica understood something she hadn't before. The risk of loss was the price of love, and it was worth paying every single time. The first month was a blur of feedings and diaper changes and trying to remember what day it was. Hannah was a good baby, or at least not a terrible one, but she still woke every 3 hours demanding food with the imperious insistence of someone who'd clearly inherited Veronica's personality. Jonah and Veronica took shifts, stumbling through the house in the dark hours before dawn, learning Hannah's patterns and preferences. Maisie, somehow, slept through it all. Her room was at the other end of the hall, and she'd apparently inherited her father's ability to sleep through anything short of an apocalypse. She'd wake each morning refreshed and eager to help, unaware that her parents were operating on accumulated sleep deprivation that made everything feel slightly surreal. "You look terrible," Morrison observed when Jonah showed up to a video call in December, having finally returned to part-time work. "I have a 3-week-old," Jonah replied. "Terrible is aspirational right now." Veronica looks even worse. "I saw her on a call yesterday and she fell asleep mid-sentence." "What?" "She's nursing every 2 hours. I don't know how she's conscious at all." Morrison's expression softened. He'd become unexpectedly invested in their family over the past year. "You two are doing great, you know. The whole parenting thing. It suits you." "Thanks." Jonah rubbed his eyes. "Some days I feel like we're barely surviving. Then I look at the girls and think, this is what surviving is supposed to look like. Messy and exhausting and perfect." By January, they'd found something resembling a rhythm. Hannah started sleeping in longer stretches, 4 hours, then 5, blessed increments that made Jonah and Veronica feel almost human again. Maisie had returned to school after winter break, coming home each day with elaborate drawings of Hannah that she'd made during art class. "My teacher says I'm very talented," Maisie announced one afternoon, spreading her latest work across the kitchen table. "She thinks I should enter the district art competition." "You absolutely should," Veronica said, bouncing Hannah gently against her shoulder. The baby had just eaten and was fighting sleep, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching. "What would you draw?" "A family portrait," Maisie said immediately. "All of us, including Professor Shellsworth. We're a work of art." She said it so seriously that both Jonah and Veronica laughed, which made Maisie beam with pride. The portrait took 3 weeks to complete. Maisie worked on it every afternoon, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she carefully rendered each family member. When she finally brought it home, matted and framed by her art teacher, they all gathered to see it. It was remarkable. Not because the technique was perfect, Maisie was 8 after all, but because of what it captured. There they were, Jonah holding Hannah, Veronica with her arm around Maisie, all of them smiling. But in the background, painted in soft, translucent colors, was another figure. A woman with kind eyes and dark hair, her hand resting gently on Jonah's shoulder. Hannah. The first Hannah. "I wanted to show that she's still part of us," Maisie explained quietly, "that we didn't forget her, that she's always here, watching." Jonah's vision blurred. He pulled Maisie into a hug, unable to speak. Veronica joined them, careful of the baby in her arms, and they stood in their kitchen crying over an 8-year-old's painting that had somehow captured everything they'd built together, the past and present, the grief and joy, the family that had formed from broken pieces. "It's perfect," Veronica finally managed. "Maisie, it's perfect." They hung it in the living room, where everyone who visited would see it, where they'd be reminded daily that love doesn't disappear when people die. It transforms, it expands, it makes room for new people while honoring those who came before. The art competition was in February, held at a community center in Lincoln Park. Maisie was nervous, the kind of vibrating energy that made her talk too fast and gesture wildly. They arrived early, Jonah carrying Hannah in a baby carrier while Veronica held Maisie's hand. The gallery was filled with children's art, paintings and sculptures and photographs, all of them innocent and earnest in the way of things made by young people who hadn't learned cynicism yet. Maisie's portrait hung in the center of the family category, and it drew a small crowd almost immediately. "That's the one," a woman said to her husband, pointing. "That's going to win." "It has something the others don't," her husband agreed. "Heart." Maisie stood beside Jonah, watching people examine her work, her face a mixture of pride and terror. When the judges announced that her portrait had won first place in the 9 and under category, she shrieked with joy and ran to hug both her parents simultaneously, nearly crushing baby Hannah in the process. "You won," Veronica said, laughing and crying. "Maisie, you won." "I told you we were a work of art," Maisie replied smugly. They celebrated with ice cream despite the February cold, sitting in the parlor near their house while Hannah slept, and Maisie talked a mile a minute about her future as a famous artist who would paint turtles and families, and maybe sometimes both at once. Watching her, healthy and happy and alive, Jonah felt the weight of the last 2 years settle into something manageable. The fear would never completely disappear, but it had transformed into something else. Vigilance, maybe, or perspective. The understanding that every moment was borrowed time and borrowed time was still time worth living. That night, after both girls were asleep, Jonah found Veronica in the nursery. She was standing over Hannah's crib, watching the baby sleep with an expression of such tenderness it hurt. "I keep thinking she'll disappear," Veronica whispered, "that I'll wake up and this will all have been a dream, that I don't get to have this happiness, this family, this second chance." Jonah came to stand beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist. "It's real. We're real, all of it. I know, logically I know, but sometimes—" Her voice cracked. "Sometimes I remember Claire, and I think about all the moments I missed. And then I look at Hannah and Maisie, and I'm terrified I'll somehow mess this up too." "You won't." Jonah turned her to face him. "Veronica, you're not the same person you were 17 years ago. You've learned. You've changed. You're present now in a way you couldn't be before. Because you taught me how. We taught each other." He kissed her forehead. "That's what family does. We teach each other how to be better." They stood there in the soft glow of the nightlight, watching their daughter sleep. And Jonah thought about all the improbable moments that had led them here. A cruel boardroom confrontation, a hospital emergency, a choice to stay instead of leave, a series of Fridays that became commitment, that became love, that became this. A family built from loss and healing and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. March brought an unexpected phone call. Dr. Okafor wanted to see them, all of them, for Maisie's routine checkup. The request was phrased casually, but Jonah heard the weight underneath. Doctors didn't summon entire families for routine appointments. The old fear came roaring back. He and Veronica spent the days before the appointment trying not to spiral, trying not to let Maisie see their terror, trying to convince themselves this was nothing, just a checkup, just routine. They brought Hannah to the appointment because they had no choice. Mrs. Chen was visiting her daughter in California, and neither of them trusted themselves to be alone with their thoughts. So they arrived at Chicago Memorial as a family of 4, Maisie chattering nervously, Hannah sleeping in her carrier, Jonah and Veronica holding hands with grips tight enough to hurt. Dr. Okafor met them in her office, rather than an exam room, which felt ominous. She smiled when she saw them, but it was her professional smile, the one she wore when delivering news that could go either way. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing them to seats. Her eyes lingered on Hannah. "She's beautiful. How old now?" 4 months, Veronica said, her voice tight. "Dr. Okafor, what's this about?" Maisie's latest scans. Dr. Okafor pulled up images on her computer, cross-sections of a small skull, black and white and indecipherable to anyone without medical training. "I wanted to show you in person because I know how much anxiety you all carry, and I didn't want you to wait." Jonah's heart stopped. Beside him, Veronica's hand went rigid. "The scans are perfect," Dr. Okafor continued, and the world started moving again. "Not just stable, perfect. No scar tissue inflammation, no residual concerns, no reason to worry. Maisie is, by every metric we have, cured." The word hung in the air, cured. Not in remission, not stable, cured. "Are you sure?" Jonah heard himself ask. "She's really—" "I'm sure." Dr. Okafor's smile widened into something genuine. We'll continue monitoring, of course, annual scans for the next 5 years, just to be certain. But Jonah, Veronica, she beat it. Your daughter beat cancer. Maisie, who'd been sitting quietly, looked between the adults with wide eyes. I'm cured? Like, really cured? Really cured, sweetheart. Dr. Okafor turned her computer monitor so Maisie could see. See this? That's your brain. Beautiful and healthy and cancer-free. Maisie stared at the images, then looked at her parents. Does this mean I don't have to come to the hospital anymore? Just once a year, Dr. Okafor said. For checkups, to make sure you stay healthy. And I can do everything? Normal kid stuff? Everything. Sports, sleepovers, summer camp, whatever you want. You're officially a regular kid. Maisie considered this, her face serious. Then she grinned, wide and bright and completely unguarded. I want to learn to swim, and ride a horse, and maybe do karate. Done, Jonah said, his voice breaking. All of it. Whatever you want. They left the hospital in a daze, Maisie skipping ahead while Jonah and Veronica walked slowly, Hannah sleeping between them. They'd made it maybe 10 steps into the parking lot before Jonah stopped, pulled Veronica into his arms, and started sobbing. She's okay, he gasped into her shoulder. She's really okay. Veronica held him, crying just as hard. She beat it. Our girl beat it. Because of you, Jonah said fiercely. Your insurance, your support, your presence. Veronica, you saved her. We saved her, Veronica corrected. All of us together. Maisie ran back to them, throwing her arms around both her parents in a hug that squeezed Hannah between them. The baby woke with a small sound of protest, and they all laughed, wet and messy, and full of relief so intense it felt like physical pain. We should celebrate, Maisie announced. This is the best news ever. We should have a party. What kind of party? Veronica asked, wiping her eyes. A Maisie beat cancer and we're all going to live forever party, Maisie declared, with cake and balloons, and Professor Shellsworth gets a party hat. So that's what they did. They drove home, called everyone who mattered, Mrs. Chen, Morrison, Dr. Okafor's nurses, Maisie's teachers, and threw together a party that was chaotic and perfect. Morrison arrived with champagne and juice boxes. Mrs. Chen brought enough food to feed an army. The nurses came in scrubs during their break, bringing gifts and tears and hugs that lasted forever. They ate cake on their back porch as the March sun set. Hannah passed between delighted adults, while Maisie held court about her plans now that she was cured. She wanted to join the swim team, take art classes, maybe get a dog if her parents stopped being difficult about it. We'll talk about the dog, Jonah said, and Maisie pumped her fist in victory because she knew that meant yes. As the party wound down and guests began leaving, Jonah found Veronica alone in the kitchen, staring at Maisie's award-winning portrait on the wall. You okay? He asked. I keep thinking about that night, she said quietly. The first night. When Maisie was in the hospital and I almost left. Almost walked away because it was too hard, too scary, too much like what I'd lost with Claire. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining. If I'd left, if I'd chosen fear instead of staying, I would have missed all of this. This family, this life, this impossible happiness. But you didn't leave, Jonah said. You stayed, and you kept staying. Because Maisie asked me to. Veronica smiled. A 6-year-old girl told me to take care of her dad, and I couldn't say no. She's always been wise beyond her years. She saved me, Veronica said simply. Both of you did. You took someone who'd forgotten how to be human and taught her how to feel again, how to love, how to live. She moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. I was drowning, Jonah. For 17 years I was drowning, and you and Maisie pulled me to shore. Outside, they heard Maisie's laughter mixed with Morrison's dramatic storytelling and Mrs. Chen's gentle corrections. Hannah started fussing, and someone, probably one of the nurses, began singing to her. The house was full of sound and warmth and life. So much life it almost hurt. We pulled each other, Jonah said into Veronica's hair. That's what love is. Mutual rescue. They rejoined the party, and the celebration continued into the evening. When everyone finally left and both girls were asleep, Jonah and Veronica sat in their living room in comfortable silence, too tired to move, but too happy to sleep. "What do you think Hannah would say?" Veronica asked suddenly. "You're Hannah. About all of this." Jonah thought about his wife, about her kindness and her fierce love, and her absolute belief that life was meant to be lived fully. "I think she'd be happy. That we're happy. That Maisie is thriving. That we found each other." He paused. "She'd probably also have some opinions about baby Hannah's name choice, but ultimately she'd be honored." "I hope so. I hope she knows I'm trying to honor her memory, that I'd never try to replace her." "You're not replacing her. You're continuing the story she started." Jonah took Veronica's hand. "And she'd love you for that. For loving us. For being here." They sat in the quiet house, two people who'd found each other through catastrophe and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Outside, Chicago hummed with its endless energy. Millions of lives being lived, millions of stories unfolding, millions of moments of joy and sorrow and everything between. But here, in this house, in this moment, there was only peace. The years that followed had the quality of a well-lived dream. Maisie grew into a gangly teenager whose room was covered in marine biology posters and whose college applications would eventually focus on oceanography programs. She won the district art competition 3 more times, each portrait more sophisticated than the last, always including the ghost of her first mother watching over the family. Hannah grew from infant to toddler to small child with Veronica's determination and Jonah's thoughtfulness and Maisie's creativity. She demanded stories about the sister she'd never met, the Hannah she was named for, and they told her everything. About her laugh, about her love of teaching, about the way she'd believed in people's potential, even when they didn't believe in themselves. "I wish I could have met her," little Hannah said once, when she was 4. "She would have loved you," Maisie told her seriously. "You have her smile, Dad says so." And it was true. Sometimes Jonah would catch Hannah at a certain angle, lit a certain way, and see his wife looking back at him through his daughter's face. It didn't hurt the way it once would have. It was just another form of continuity, the past living on in the present, love that transcended death. Veronica thrived in ways that shocked everyone, including herself. She stepped back from Halo Works, moving from CEO to chairman of the board, and focused instead on the foundation that funded medical assistance for families in crisis. She told anyone who asked that she'd learned the hard way that work was just work, but family was everything, and she wasn't making that mistake again. The company didn't crumble without her constant presence. If anything, it grew stronger, proving that her greatest achievement wasn't building an empire. It was learning when to let go. Jonah continued in his role as VP of Analytics, mentoring younger employees and teaching them that success didn't require sacrificing humanity. He wrote recommendation letters for the children of single parents, advocated for flexible work policies, and quietly funded scholarships for kids whose families were drowning in medical debt. He'd learned what really mattered, and he made sure that knowledge spread. Professor Shellsworth lived to the impressive age of 23, dying peacefully in his habitat while Maisie was away at college. They held a funeral in the backyard, ridiculous and heartfelt, because the turtle had been there through everything and deserved to be honored. Maisie cried, not just for Professor Shellsworth, but for everything he represented: survival, resilience, the unexpected ways that love shows up when you need it most. They got the dog Maisie had campaigned for, a rescue mutt named Captain, who appointed himself guardian of both girls and took his duties seriously. He'd sleep outside Hannah's room at night and walk Maisie to the bus stop each morning when she was home from college, his tail wagging with the satisfaction of someone who'd found his purpose. On a warm evening in June, when Maisie was home for summer break, and Hannah was 8 years old and talkative and healthy, they gathered in Millennium Park for a picnic. It had become their tradition, an annual reminder of how far they'd come, how much they'd survived, how thoroughly their lives had changed. Maisie had just completed her sophomore year at UC San Diego, studying marine biology and working with sea turtle conservation programs. She showed them pictures on her phone: beaches in Mexico, turtle eggs being protected, hatchlings making their way to the ocean. "This is what I meant to do," she said, her face glowing. "Help things survive. Give them a fighting chance." "You learned that young?" Veronica said softly, and Maisie reached over to squeeze her hand. Hannah was drawing in the grass, her tongue sticking out in concentration, just like Maisie used to do. She was making a picture of their family, all 6 of them, if you counted the ghost of Hannah the First and Professor Shellsworth, which Hannah definitely did. "Do you think Mom's watching?" Hannah asked suddenly, looking up at Veronica. She called both Hannahs Mom in different contexts, something the family had learned to navigate. "Which mom?" Veronica asked gently. "Both of them, my first mom and my name Mom." I think they're both watching," Jonah said, pulling his daughter onto his lap. "And I think they're proud of all of us." "Even me?" Hannah asked. "I didn't do anything yet. I'm only 8. "You're alive," Maisie said. "You're happy. You're loved. That's everything." They stayed until sunset, watching the city light up around them, the skyline brilliance against the darkening sky, Millennium Park filling with evening crowds, street musicians playing, children running, couples walking hand in hand, the whole messy, beautiful chaos of human life on display. Veronica held baby Hannah, except she wasn't a baby anymore, hadn't been for years, and felt something settle in her chest. For 17 years after Claire's death, she'd carried guilt like a stone. It had weighed her down, shaped her decisions, made her cruel in her attempt to avoid ever feeling that pain again. But loving Jonah and Maisie and Hannah had shown her something crucial. Guilt wasn't the same as love, and punishing yourself didn't honor the dead. What honored them was living fully, loving completely, being present for the people who needed you. "Thank you," she said suddenly, and everyone turned to look at her. "For what?" Jonah asked. "For saving me. For teaching me how to be human again. For giving me a second chance I didn't deserve but will spend the rest of my life trying to earn." Her voice shook. "I was drowning when I met you, both of you, and you pulled me to shore." "We were all drowning," Maisie said. "We just learned to swim together." It was the perfect summary of everything they'd built. Not a fairy tale with easy answers, but a real story about real people who'd found each other through crisis and chosen, over and over, to stay. Who'd learned that love wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, about showing up even when it was hard, about choosing each other day after day, through fear and joy and everything between. As the light faded and the park began to empty, they packed up their picnic and walked back to their car. Jonah carried Hannah on his shoulders. Maisie walked beside Veronica, their heads bent together as Maisie showed her pictures from school. They moved through the Chicago evening like what they were, a family. Not a perfect one, but a real one. That night, after both girls were asleep, Jonah found Veronica on their back porch. She was holding a piece of paper. He recognized it immediately as one of her letters to Claire. "Still writing to her?" he asked gently. "Less often now, but sometimes I need to." She showed him the letter. "I was telling her about Hannah, about Maisie, about you, about how I finally understand what I missed all those years ago." "What's that?" "That the point of life isn't achievement or success or building empires." Veronica folded the letter carefully. "It's just this: showing up for people, being present, loving them in whatever time we have." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the porch light. "I missed it with Claire. I won't miss it again." Jonah pulled her into his arms, and they stood there in the warm June air, holding each other under a sky full of stars. In the house behind them, their daughters slept safely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Inside, Hannah stirred in her sleep and smiled, dreaming, perhaps, of the family that surrounded her, of the sister who adored her, and the parents who'd chosen each other through impossible circumstances, of a life that had been built from love and loss and the stubborn refusal to give up. And somewhere, in memory, in legacy, in the names they carried and the stories they told, 2 Hannahs watched over them. One who'd loved Jonah first and given him Maisie. One who'd been lost too young, but whose name lived on in a child who'd never met her, but honored her daily simply by existing. The past and present, intertwined. The dead and the living, forever connected. A family that had been broken and remade, scarred but stronger, imperfect but whole. This was the happy ending that nobody had expected. Not because it was easy, it hadn't been. Not because it erased the pain, it hadn't. But because they'd learned that happy endings weren't about avoiding suffering. They were about choosing to keep living, keep loving, keep showing up even when it hurt. They were about presence over perfection, connection over control, love over fear. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything. The woman who'd once ruled through cruelty had learned to lead through compassion. The man who'd been drowning in grief had found reasons to keep swimming. The child who'd faced death had chosen life with fierce determination. And together they'd built something that would last. Not forever, because nothing lasts forever, but for as long as they had, which was all anyone could ask for, which was everything.